There is a hush to the land before the frost deepens, before the last warmth drains from the soil. The fields have yielded all they can. The stubble of wheat and barley stands like broken brushstrokes across the sleeping earth. Trees shed the memory of their leaves, drying to the shape of patience, holding nothing, waiting for what will come. In the villages, people slow too. They gather the last grain into wooden bins, cover jars of fruit in cool cellars, tie bundles of herbs above their hearths. Smoke rises thin and straight through the chill air. At night, the roads are silent, an emptiness so complete it hums. You can feel time folding in on itself, like fabric drawn close for warmth. The days are shorter now. The sun lingers low, unwilling to climb. But this is not a story of death. It is a story of waiting, of the long inward breath before change. Winter is not punishment, nor ending. It is the quiet between steps, the pause between heartbeats, the moment the world remembers what it has lost before learning how to let go again. Somewhere far above this stillness, on the vast and bright ledges of Olympus, the gods watch the same shortening days. Before the fracture, there were years of wholeness, seasons turning like breath, predictable as sunrise, gentle as the rhythm of a mother's heartbeat beneath a sleeping child's ear. Spring, 3 years before. Persephone was still small enough that her hand disappeared entirely inside her mother's palm. They walked through meadows thick with new clover, and Demeter named each bloom as they passed: violet, crocus, windflower, sweet alyssum. The girl repeated every word like an incantation, her voice bright as birdsong. "What happens when flowers die, Mother?" Persephone asked, kneeling beside a withered bloom, its petals brown and curled. Demeter knelt beside her. "They return to the earth. Their roots remain, sleeping, until spring calls them back. Do they dream while they sleep? Perhaps. Of light, I think, of the sun's warmth on their faces." Persephone touched the dead flower gently, as if it might wake at her fingertips. "I would dream of you," she said simply. Demeter gathered her daughter close, breathing in the scent of grass and childhood. But even then, even in that moment of perfect tenderness, she felt the faintest tremor of something unsaid, a question in the air, like the first hint of distant thunder. Summer, 2 years before. They worked the harvest fields together, Persephone tall enough now to carry her own basket. The grain stood golden and heavy, whispering secrets to the wind. The girl moved through the stalks with reverence, touching each head as if greeting an old friend. "Mother," she said, pausing mid-step, "why do we cut them down? If we love them, why must they fall?" Demeter straightened, wiping sweat from her brow. The sun beat down merciless and bright. "Because love is not possession, child. We tend them so they may fulfill their purpose. The grain feeds the world. Its death is not ending, it is transformation." "But doesn't it hurt them?" "All things that grow must also yield. That is the bargain of life." Persephone was quiet for a long time, her brow furrowed in thought. That night, Demeter found her daughter sitting at the window, staring out at the darkened fields. "What troubles you?" Demeter asked. "I dreamed last night," Persephone said softly, "of roots going down and down, so deep I couldn't see where they ended, and I wondered what lives at the bottom, below even the deepest root." Demeter's hand stilled on her daughter's shoulder. "Nothing lives there, beloved, only stone and darkness." "But how do you know?" Persephone asked, turning to meet her mother's eyes, "if you have never looked?" Autumn, 1 year before. The leaves fell like copper rain. Persephone, nearly grown now, walked ahead of her mother along the forest path. She moved with new grace, her body learning its own language separate from childhood's ungainly joy. They came to a stream where the water ran clear over smooth stones. Persephone knelt at its edge, trailing her fingers through the current. "Mother," she said, "you taught me that seeds must be buried in darkness before they grow. You taught me that what dies feeds what lives. But you never speak of the darkness itself, only what emerges from it." Demeter felt a chill that had nothing to do with autumn wind. "What do you wish to know? Is darkness only absence, or is it something else, something that exists for its own sake? Why do you ask such things?" Persephone lifted her hand from the water. Droplets caught the fading light, each one a tiny sun. "Because I feel it sometimes, calling, like the world has another half that I've never seen, a mirror face that lives beneath the one I know." "You are of the light, Persephone, of growth and green and living things. That is your inheritance." "But what if I am also of the dark?" The girl's voice was not defiant, only curious, the way a bird might ask why it has wings. "What if both are true?" Demeter had no answer. She gathered her daughter into her arms as the sun descended, holding her as if she could keep her in the light through will alone. That night, after Persephone slept, Demeter stood at the threshold of their home and stared at the earth beneath her feet. For the first time in her eternal life, she wondered what listened from below. Before the breaking, there was symmetry. Zeus ruled from his high throne all judgment and command. His voice was thunder, his will impartial, not warmth, not love, but order, like the arc of lightning or the weight of law. He cared little for the small intimacies of mortal or divine life. His concern was structure, hierarchy, the grand architecture that held creation in its proper place. Around him, the other gods moved in their elaborate dance, Hera with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue watching every transgression, Aphrodite trailing desire like perfume through marble halls, Athena calculating strategies in the spaces between words, Apollo's lyre singing the mathematics of beauty, Poseidon brooding at the edges, always half ready to return to the ocean's depths. But two among them stood apart. Demeter dwelled nearer to the living world than most. Her hands carried scent, grain, olive, blossom, and the rhythmic beat of the seasons themselves. When she moved across fields, grasses rose greener. When she turned her face away, soils cooled in sorrow. She was the breathing pulse beneath the hum of growth, the heartbeat the earth followed without question. The other gods respected her, but few understood her. Her power was not flashy, not dramatic, it was fundamental. She fed the world, and the world loved her for it. But love of that magnitude can be isolating. She was needed more than she was known. And Persephone, still girl, not yet queen, she stood between the green and the gold, between innocence and knowing. Her laughter was a running stream, her gaze the shift between day and dusk. Spring was hers, but it had not yet been named for her. She did not belong only to blossoms, nor only to her mother's gaze. Already something quieter stirred within her, an awareness that life deepens in the places unseen, that what lives above thrives only because something rests below. On Olympus, they were a trinity of motion, law, abundance, and becoming, all in balance, all in their places. One afternoon, if time can be said to pass on Olympus, Zeus called Demeter to his hall. The light there was hard and bright, throwing sharp shadows across the marble floor. "Sister," he said, his voice the rumble of distant thunder, "the mortals grow restless in their prosperity. They forget to honor us with proper fear." Demeter regarded him coolly. "They honor us with their labor, with every field planted, every harvest gathered. Is that not worship enough?" "Worship," Zeus replied, "requires awareness of consequence. They take your gifts as given, eternal, beyond revocation. They have forgotten what it means to hunger." "Would you have me withhold the harvest, let them starve to teach them gratitude?" "I would have you remember," Zeus said softly, dangerously, "that order requires balance, that abundance unchecked becomes complacency. Even benevolence must be tempered by the possibility of its absence." Demeter said nothing, but her eyes held a warning Zeus did not see, or chose not to see. In the shadows of the hall, Hades had been standing, silent and nearly invisible. He so rarely ascended to Olympus that the others had almost forgotten his presence. He watched the exchange with eyes that had seen too much and said too little. When Demeter left, Zeus turned to his brother. "You have been absent from our councils." "I tend my realm," Hades said quietly. "The dead do not require politics." "They require only you." Zeus's tone held something between pity and disdain. "Do you not grow weary, eternity in shadow with only the departed for company?" Hades' expression did not change. "I do what must be done, as we all do." But later, as he descended back into his realm, Hades paused at the threshold between worlds. He surfaced briefly, just enough to glimpse the mortal lands bathed in late afternoon light. And there, in a distant meadow, he saw her. A girl moving through flowers, her hair catching sunlight, her laughter carrying on the wind. She bent to examine something in the grass, a butterfly perhaps, or a wounded bird, and the tenderness in that gesture struck him like a blade. Life, he thought, pure and absolute, everything his realm was not. He descended quickly, disturbed by the ache that simple vision had opened in his chest. The underworld sealed above him, and he returned to his work, but the image remained, luminous in the darkness of his mind. Even balance holds within it the promise of movement. Each morning, Demeter and Persephone walked the edges of the fields. They moved together like light and shadow braided through the tall stalks. Demeter named each plant as they passed: barley, poppy, myrtle, hyacinth, the same way she had named them since time first grew tender enough to bloom. Persephone echoed her mother's words, her voice lifting into the cold air like song. They paused for the smallest things: dew trembling on a spider's web, the press of a rabbit's track, the seed head about to fall. One morning, Demeter stopped beside a young wheat plant, its stalk barely knee-high. She knelt in the damp earth, pressing both palms flat against the soil. "Come," she said, "feel." Persephone knelt beside her, mirroring her mother's posture. The ground was cool, slightly wet from the night's rain. At first she felt nothing, only the ordinary sensation of dirt against skin. "Close your eyes," Demeter murmured. "Listen with your hands." Persephone obeyed. Slowly, beneath the surface stillness, she became aware of something else, a subtle pulse, rhythmic and patient, like a heartbeat, but slower, deeper. "What is it?" she whispered. "The earth's blood, the current that feeds all growing things. Every root drinks from it, every seed wakes to its rhythm." Demeter's voice was soft, reverent. "This is your inheritance, daughter, the ability to hear what lives beneath silence, to speak the language of green and root and soil." Persephone opened her eyes. "Can you speak to the earth, mother? Does it answer you?" "Not in words, but in growth, in the way seeds turn toward my touch, the way grain ripens when I ask it to." She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "One day you will speak this language more fluently than I do." "How do you know?" "Because you already ask questions I never thought to ask, because your curiosity reaches deeper than mine ever did." Demeter's expression grew distant. "Perhaps too deep." Persephone wanted to press further, but her mother was already standing, brushing soil from her hands. They continued their walk, and the moment passed. But as they moved through the fields, Persephone found herself distracted. Her gaze kept drifting to the places where shadows gathered, beneath the low-hanging branches, in the hollows where rain collected, at the far edge of the meadow where wild things grew untamed. When they rested beneath an ancient olive tree, Demeter taught her patience. "The seed cannot be forced," she said, offering her daughter bread and honey. "It breaks from within. All you can do is tend and trust." Persephone nodded, though her mind wandered. "Mother, what happens to the seeds that don't break, the ones that stay buried?" "They rot. They become soil again. Not all seeds are meant to grow." "But how do they know? How does a seed decide whether to rise or to rest?" Demeter frowned slightly. "It doesn't decide, beloved. It simply follows its nature. Growth is not a choice. It is an imperative." "But what if—" Persephone hesitated, searching for words. "What if something in the darkness called to them? What if they stayed down not because they failed, but because they belonged there?" "Nothing belongs in darkness, Persephone. Darkness is absence. It is the place we pass through on the way to light, nothing more." But even as Demeter spoke, she felt the inadequacy of her own certainty. Her daughter's questions had begun to unsettle the foundations of understanding she'd built over eons. Their love was complete in the way sunlight meets water, reflected, inseparable. Demeter's life was her daughter, and Persephone's first joy was simply being within that light. Yet even in perfect love, there is the faint trembling of change, a question unfurling like a root in the dark. One evening, after Demeter had fallen asleep, Persephone slipped from their home and walked to the edge of the nearest field. The moon hung low and full, painting everything silver. She stood at the boundary between tended land and wilderness, between the known and the unexplored. She closed her eyes and pressed her palms against the earth as her mother had taught her. And this time, beneath the familiar pulse of growth, she heard something else, a different rhythm, darker and slower, like the heartbeat of stone itself. It did not speak, but it knew her. It had been waiting. Persephone opened her eyes, breathing fast. She looked back toward the house where her mother slept, then forward into the wild darkness beyond. Not yet, she thought, but soon, because every seed that grows must one day let go of its shell, and every mother who tends the earth must in time learn to loosen her hold. In the depths beneath the world, where light does not reach and time moves like honey through stone, Hades performed his duties. The dead came in an endless stream, some bold, some fearful, most simply confused. He received them all with the same quiet attention. He did not judge their lives, only guided them to their proper places. The virtuous to Elysium's golden fields, the wicked to Tartarus's depths, the ordinary to the gray meadows of Asphodel, where they could rest in peaceful forgetting. It was work that never ended, and it suited him. Order, maintenance, the careful tending of boundaries between what was and what is no longer. But it was lonely. The dead did not speak to him, not truly. They murmured their regrets and their longings, but they spoke past him, through him, their words meant for the lives they'd left behind. He was only the threshold, the doorway through which they passed, necessary but not seen. He did not resent this. He had chosen this realm, or perhaps it had chosen him. When the cosmos was divided among the three brothers, Zeus had taken the sky with barely concealed triumph, Poseidon the seas with wild joy. Hades had accepted the underworld without protest. Someone had to tend the dead, and he understood even then that he was suited for it. Patient, thorough, unsentimental. But understanding one's purpose does not always ease its weight. One evening, though there was no true day or night in his realm, only the endless gray sameness, he sat alone in his throne room. The vast hall stretched empty around him, pillars of obsidian rising into shadow. Rivers flowed at the edges, Styx, Acheron, Lethe, their waters whispering languages even he could not fully comprehend. Cerberus, his three-headed hound, lay at his feet. Hades scratched behind one of the beast's ears absently. "Is this enough?" he asked the silence. "To be keeper of endings? To witness every life's final breath and offer nothing but passage?" The silence, as always, did not answer. He rose, restless, a rare feeling for him. He walked to the edge of his realm, to the place where the boundaries thinned, where stone gave way to possibility. With a thought, he parted the barrier just enough to see the world above. Sunlight struck him like a blow. He squinted against it, overwhelmed by color and movement and the sheer aggressive brightness of living things. A bird sang nearby, its voice sharp and impossibly clear. Wind moved through leaves, creating music he had forgotten existed. And in the distance, in a meadow thick with flowers, he saw figures moving. He meant to look away, to return to his realm and forget this moment of weakness. But then one of the figures turned, and he saw her face. She was young, neither child nor woman, but the space between. Her hair fell loose down her back, woven through with small flowers that seemed to have grown there naturally. She was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her whole body a gesture of joy. And then she knelt in the grass, reaching towards something he couldn't see. Her expression transformed, became tender, focused, reverent. She lifted a small bird in her cupped hands, examining a damaged wing with careful attention. The gentleness of that gesture, the way she held fragility as if it were sacred, cut through him. This, he thought, is what life looks like. Not the grand gesture, not the heroic deed, just this, a girl holding a wounded bird, trying to understand how to help. He watched longer than he should have,
watched as she wrapped the bird's wing carefully, as she set it in the shelter of a bush, as she whispered something to it before walking away. Watched as she rejoined her companion, an older woman, her mother perhaps, whose every movement mirrored protective love. When she disappeared from view, Hades let the barrier seal once more. The gray sameness of the underworld felt heavier than before, emptier. He returned to his throne and sat in the silence, disturbed by the ache that vision had planted in his chest. For centuries he had existed without wanting. His realm was enough, his purpose was clear, but now something had shifted. He had glimpsed what he lacked, and the knowledge sat in him like a stone. Not desire precisely, not the crude possessive hunger he saw in Zeus's endless conquests. Something different, something closer to recognition, as if in that moment of watching her tend the wounded bird, he had seen the missing piece of his own existence. Life and death, growth and ending, two halves of the same whole, always separate. Until now he had believed separation was necessary, proper, the living above, the dead below, and never the boundary crossed. But what if balance required more than separation? What if wholeness demanded integration? The thought disturbed him. He pushed it away. But it returned, persistent as water finding cracks in stone, and with it the image of her face, luminous with life, radiant with the kind of hope that could only exist in those who had never learned the taste of ash. He did not plan what came next. Planning implies intention, and what grew in him was more fundamental than intention, more like gravity, like the inevitable pull of one realm toward another. He simply began to wait. For what, he did not know yet, but the underworld had taught him patience, and patience can transform waiting into something almost like faith.
As the days moved toward the edge of true winter, a stillness came that even the gods could feel. The air itself seemed to listen. Mortals shut their doors and tended their fires. The earth slept beneath its thin blanket of frost, waiting for some unseen agreement to be made, a trade between what is kept and what must be surrendered. On Olympus, clouds gathered like thoughts unspoken. Even the ever-laughing gods lowered their voices. Somewhere in that silence, a choice ripened. It waited for the touch that would set it loose, unseen, inevitable, as natural as the turning of the year. And beneath the quiet fields, beneath the roots and stone, the underworld held its breath. The world, though it did not yet know it, stood at the edge of its own heartbeat. It began, as so many endings do, with beauty. A day so mild it felt stolen from the season before. The wind still carried the scent of sun-warmed clover. Every blade of grass shimmered with dew not yet surrendered to the frost. The sky arched in perfect calm, high, silver, wide enough to forget the narrowing days. Persephone had risen early, before her mother woke. She told herself she was only walking, only exploring the edges of the morning. But some part of her knew she was looking for something, had been looking for months, perhaps years. That call she'd felt in the darkness, that rhythm beneath the rhythm of growth. She moved beyond the fields her mother tended, beyond the familiar paths, into the wild meadow where things grew untamed. The grass here was taller, thick with flowers that swayed at her passing. Bees murmured low and purposeful. The air shimmered with sunlight distilled into gold. She felt lighter here, unobserved, free to simply be, without the weight of her mother's watchful love. She walked slowly, running her hands across the seed heads, feeling their dry whisper against her palms. The morning stretched around her, vast and unhurried. For a moment she let herself imagine staying here forever, just walking, just being, with nothing expected and nothing owed. Then she saw it. At first it was only a paleness among the ordinary blooms, a suggestion of luminescence, like moonlight remembered in daylight. She moved toward it without thinking, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. The flower stood alone, taller than its neighbors, impossibly white, its petals unfurling in layers like the chambers of a secret heart. The fragrance rising from it made her dizzy, not sweet, not sharp, but something stranger. It smelled like depth, like the earth's hidden rivers, like the space beneath sleep where dreams are born. She knelt in the soft earth, her pulse loud in her ears. The flower seemed to pulse too in rhythm with her heartbeat. Or perhaps her heartbeat had changed to match its rhythm. She couldn't tell. Up close she could see that its petals held patterns like veins, like rivers, like the branching paths of roots descending. Beautiful, yes, but also unsettling, as if it did not quite belong to the world of surfaces, as if it had grown from some deeper place and brought that depth with it into the light. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. The flower did not answer, but something in the air tightened. The bees fell silent, the wind paused mid-breath. Persephone reached out slowly, her hand trembling. Some part of her knew this was a threshold, that touching this bloom would change something fundamental and irreversible. But the call was too strong, the need to know, to understand, to finally answer the question that had been growing in her for years. Her fingertips brushed the petals. They were cool, silk soft, and the moment she touched them, she felt it. That pulse beneath the pulse, that deeper heartbeat she'd been chasing in her dreams. The earth knew her name, and it had been waiting.
3 days before, in the deepest chamber of the underworld, Hades had done something he had never done before. He had prayed, not to Zeus, not to the fates, but to Gaia herself, the Earth Mother, the first consciousness, the one who existed before gods and would exist after. She who was neither living nor dead, but the ground in which both conditions took root. He had knelt on the stone floor of his throne room and pressed his palms flat against the rock. "Mother," he had whispered, "I do not ask for much. I have never asked for anything, but I am incomplete, and there is one who could make me whole if she chose, if she were willing. But I cannot reach her, cannot speak to her. The living world is not mine to enter." The stone had been silent. He had not expected otherwise. But then, slowly, he had felt warmth rising from below. Not heat, something gentler, like recognition, like assent. And Gaia's voice, when it came, was not sound, but knowing, arriving in his mind like memory. "What you seek cannot be taken, only offered. What you lack cannot be demanded, only received. But if the maiden herself yearns for depth, if she too feels the call of the hidden places, then perhaps balance asks for movement. Perhaps wholeness requires both realms to meet." "What must I do?" Hades had asked. "Plant a seed in the between places. Let it grow where neither light nor dark holds full dominion. If she reaches for it, she reaches for you. If she turns away, accept her refusal. And if she reaches, then the world will change, and change is neither good nor evil, it simply is. You seek a queen, but you may find instead a revolution. Are you willing to accept what comes? I am, he had said, though his voice trembled. The warmth had faded, but when he rose, he found in his hand a single seed, black as obsidian, luminous as pearl, existing in the space between contradictions. He had carried it to the thinnest place between his realm and the mortal world. There, in a wild meadow, where Demeter's careful tending had never reached, he had planted it. The seed had sprouted instantly, growing with impossible speed. In moments it was mature, blooming, a narcissus, yes, but not like any that grew in common soil. This one carried the underworld in its roots and reached toward light with the memory of darkness woven through every cell. Hades had looked at it for a long moment. Then he had returned to his realm to wait. Not to watch, not to manipulate, only to wait and to hope. In the shadows beyond the meadow, Hecate stood witness. The torchbearer, the goddess of crossroads and choices, had felt the disturbance in the boundaries between realms. She had seen the flower bloom, had understood immediately what it was, what it meant. She could have intervened, could have warned Demeter or Persephone, or even Zeus, could have prevented what was about to unfold. But Hecate understood something the other gods did not, that there are moments when the world itself chooses to change, and to stand against such moments is not wisdom, but hubris. She watched the girl approach the flower, watched her kneel, hesitate, reach out. Choose well, maiden, for what comes next no god can undo. Then she stepped back into shadow, bearing witness, but not interfering. This was Persephone's choice to make.
The moment Persephone's skin met petal, everything stopped. The world held its breath, every bird frozen mid-flight, every leaf suspended in air, the sun itself pausing in its arc across the sky. Then sound returned, but wrong. A low groan that rolled up through the roots, through layers of soil and stone, from somewhere so deep that distance lost all meaning. The ground shuddered, the air tightened like a drawn bowstring. Persephone tried to pull her hand back, but the flower held her. Not physically. There was no force, no grip, but she couldn't move. The connection had become absolute. The earth split. Not violently, not with chaos, but with terrible purpose. The meadow tore like cloth, revealing darkness beneath. Not the darkness of night or shadow, but something older. The absence from which all presence springs. The flowers around her burst upward, roots exposed, petals scattering, stones tumbled into the widening chasm. The narcissus remained perfect, untouched, still blooming in Persephone's frozen hand. Then she saw them rising from below. Horses, 4 of them, massive and midnight black. Their eyes burned not with fire, but with stillness, the calm at the center of endings. They pulled a chariot wrought of materials that had no names in the sunlit world, metal that drank light rather than reflecting it, wood that had never grown from living tree. And at the reins stood Hades. He was not monstrous, not the demon figure of mortal nightmares. His face was pale as bone, beautiful in the way winter is beautiful, austere, honest, stripped of all excess. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze she saw depths that made her dizzy. Eons of solitude, rivers of sorrow, the accumulated weight of every ending ever witnessed. But also longing, recognition, a question asked without words. For an instant, less than a heartbeat, longer than a lifetime, they simply looked at each other. And in that looking, something passed between them that was neither capture nor seduction, but a kind of terrible understanding. He did not smile, did not speak, but she heard his voice in her mind, or perhaps her own thoughts speaking in his language. I have waited, and you have been calling, even if you did not know it. Then the moment shattered. The horses surged forward, pulling the chariot up through the rift. Hades reached down, not grabbing, but offering his hand. And Persephone, moving in a dream or a nightmare or something beyond both, felt her body respond before her mind could catch up. She took his hand. His grip was cool, firm, real. He pulled her up beside him in one smooth motion. The narcissus came with her, still clutched in her other hand, its petals beginning to fade from white to silver. "Wait," she tried to say, but the word dissolved in the wind that rose from below, a wind that smelled of minerals and darkness and ancient water. The chariot turned, diving back into the chasm. The horses plunged downward without hesitation, their hooves striking stone that rang like bells, like sorrow, like the closing of doors that had stood open since the world began. Persephone's scream rose, bright, piercing, desperate. "Mother!" The sound split the frozen air, echoing across the meadow, through the fields beyond, carrying on the wind to every corner of the mortal world. Demeter, miles away, felt it like a blade through her chest. But before she could turn, before she could begin to run, the earth sealed itself. The chasm closed like a wound healing in reverse. Grass and stone knitting back together until no trace remained except crushed flowers and scattered petals spinning slowly to the ground. Silence reclaimed the meadow. The sun resumed its journey. The birds flew on. Only the narcissus remained, wilting now in the ordinary light, its impossible bloom already fading to common white. Within moments it would be indistinguishable from any other flower, and no one would ever know what it had been. The wind passed through the grasses again, as if nothing had happened. But far away, running now through the fields with her heart breaking in her chest, Demeter knew. The earth itself had told her in the language of mothers and loss. Her daughter was gone, taken into the hidden places where light does not reach and prayers cannot follow. And winter, the first true winter, began to wake in the wake of her grief.
First day. Demeter ran until her lungs burned, until her immortal body remembered what exhaustion felt like. She reached the meadow as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of ending. The grass lay crushed in places, petals scattered like pale blood. But of the chasm, of the darkness that had opened here, nothing. The earth was whole, silent, refusing to acknowledge what it had witnessed. "Persephone!" Her voice cracked the twilight. "Persephone, answer me!" Only echo returned, mocking and empty. She fell to her knees, pressing her hands against the soil. "Show me!
she whispered, then louder, "Show me where she went!" The earth did not respond, or perhaps it did in its own way, with silence that felt like pity. Demeter searched through the night, combing every inch of the meadow and beyond. She found the broken stems where her daughter had walked, found the place where she had knelt, found, half hidden in the grass, a single white petal that glowed faintly in the moonlight. She lifted it to her face, breathing in its scent. Beneath the sweetness lay something else, something mineral and deep, a trace of the underworld's breath. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no!" But denial changes nothing. 2nd through 4th days. Demeter went to the mountain nymphs who dwelt in caves and knew the earth's bones. "Have you seen my daughter, a girl with flowers in her hair, laughter like spring water?" The nymphs shrank from her intensity. "No, goddess, we have seen nothing." She descended to the river valleys, questioned the naiads who danced in streams. They whispered among themselves, eyes downcast. "We saw her pass this way 3 days ago, but no more." She climbed to high places where the wind spirits lived. "Tell me what you've seen, you who touch all corners of the world. Tell me." The winds murmured uncertainly, conflicting reports. "We heard a cry. We saw shadows. There was a disturbance in the meadow beyond." Nothing certain, nothing she could follow. Each sunset found her more desperate. She stopped sleeping, stopped tending the fields, stopped caring for anything except the search. Her divine composure cracked like drought-dried earth. Her hair came loose from its bindings. Dirt stained her robes. Her eyes, usually warm as summer wheat, turned hard as stones.
On the 4th night, she stood at a crossroads and screamed her daughter's name until her throat bled, until the stars themselves seemed to dim in sympathy. No answer came. 5th through 9th days. Demeter became methodical in her desperation. She divided the known world into sections, searching each with the thoroughness of harvest time. Every cave, every valley, every hidden grove. She questioned everyone she met. A shepherd on a hillside. "Have you seen a girl alone?" "Many girls, lady. Which one?" "The one who walks with spring itself." The shepherd shook his head. "I've seen only sheep and sky." An old woman grinding grain. "My daughter is missing." "Many daughters go missing, stranger. The world is wide and dangerous. Not like this, not taken by the earth itself." The woman made a sign against evil and turned away. A young boy fishing in a stream. "Did you see anything strange, hear anything?" The boy looked up, uncertain. 3 days ago, I heard thunder, but there were no clouds." "Where?" He pointed toward the wild meadow. "That way, but I was afraid, so I didn't look." With each refusal, each empty answer, Demeter felt something harden in her chest. The world that had once felt like an extension of herself now seemed alien, hostile, deliberately hiding the truth from her. She began to change. The grass withered slightly where she walked. The air around her grew colder. Farmers looked up from their fields and shivered without knowing why. On the 9th day, as the sun set in a sky gone gray and heavy, Hecate appeared. The torchbearer stepped from shadow as if shadow were merely a doorway. Her face was ancient and young at once, marked with knowledge of all the between places. "Demeter," she said quietly, "I would speak with you." Demeter spun toward her, hope and fury warring in her expression. "Do you know? Have you seen?
"I have heard," Hecate said carefully. 9 days ago at dusk I heard a cry, a single scream cut short. It came from the wild meadow where flowers bloom untended. "I've been there, I've searched." "I know, but I cannot tell you more than this. I heard, but I did not see. Whatever took her moved in ways even my sight cannot follow." Demeter's hands clenched into fists. Who would dare? "That I cannot say, but—" Hecate hesitated. "There are powers older than Olympus, Demeter, powers of depth and darkness. If you would find your daughter, you must look not across the world, but beneath it." "Beneath?" The word came out as a broken whisper. Hecate met her eyes with compassion and steel. "The earth has 3 realms, surface, sky, and depth. You have searched 2. Perhaps it is time to consider the 3rd. Then she faded back into shadow, leaving Demeter alone with a truth she could not yet bear to face. 10th day. Helios reveals. Dawn broke on the 10th day to find Demeter standing at the edge of a cliff, staring upward at the rising sun. She had not moved all night. When Helios's chariot crested the horizon, blazing with light that saw all things, Demeter gathered what remained of her divine authority and called out, "Helios, all-seeing one, I compel you by the laws of kinship and cosmic order, tell me what you know." The sun god slowed his horses, his face appearing in the brilliant corona. He looked uncomfortable, as gods do when caught between truth and politics. "Demeter," he said slowly, "what do you ask of me? My daughter, you see all that transpires beneath your gaze. Where is she? Who took her?" A long silence. The horses stamped, impatient. The sun's light seemed to flicker. Helios began, then stopped. "Tell me!" Demeter's voice cracked the morning air like thunder. Around her the cliff face sprouted dead vines, brown and brittle. "Tell me, by your oath to truth, by the cosmic order Zeus himself established, tell me!" Helios closed his eyes, a god dreading divine consequence. When he opened them again, his voice was gentle with regret. "Your daughter lives, Demeter, but she no longer walks in light." "What do you mean?" 10 days ago, in the meadow beyond the fields, the earth opened. A chariot rose from beneath, drawn by horses of shadow. At its reins stood Hades, lord of the dead, king of the underworld. Demeter swayed as if struck. No, that's impossible. She would never." "She took his hand," Helios said softly. "Whether in choice or compulsion, I cannot say, but she descended with him into the darkness, and the earth sealed behind them." "Below?" Demeter's voice was barely audible. "In the realm of death?" "I am sorry, Grainbringer. I saw, but I could not intervene. What passes between the gods is beyond even my station to prevent." Demeter stared at him, her mind unable to process the enormity of what she'd heard. Her daughter, her spring, her joy, her reason for existence, trapped in the sunless depths where nothing grows and nothing lives. "Zeus knew," she whispered. "This was sanctioned." Helios said nothing, which was enough answer. "Get out of my sight," Demeter said, her voice gone flat and cold. "You who see all but do nothing, leave me." The sun god departed, his chariot racing across the sky as if fleeing judgment. Demeter stood alone on the cliff, staring down at her hands. They had shaped harvests, coaxed life from barren soil, fed generations without number. Now they trembled with useless power. She tried to reach out with her awareness, to touch the underworld, to find the boundary between life and death and tear through it. But the barrier held absolute. She could no more enter that realm than the dead could return to hers. Hades had taken her daughter beyond reach, beyond rescue, beyond every power she possessed. For the first time in her eternal existence, Demeter felt helpless. And helplessness in a goddess of her magnitude is a dangerous thing. She closed her eyes, took a breath that shuddered through her entire being. When she opened them again, something fundamental had changed. If they would not return Persephone, then the world would learn what it meant to lose her. Every growing thing would remember, every seed would mourn. She would make them understand. Winter, true winter, the kind that breaks hope and shatters certainty, was about to be born.
The world dimmed quietly at first. There were no storms yet, no disasters, only an unsettling hush. The fields, once so alive with whispering grain, now stood still. The air smelled hollow, like something forgotten. The people felt it before they named it, that sense that the world itself had grown weary of breathing. Demeter left Olympus without ceremony. She cast aside her garlands, her golden mantle, the sheen of divinity. She went into the world as an old woman wrapped in gray. Her step was slow, uncertain at first. Her hand no longer lifted the grasses as she passed. Among mortals, she found nothing of comfort. Some welcomed her, offering bread made from their dwindling stores. Others turned their eyes away, unable to spare kindness when hunger had begun its slow approach. In the coastal village of Pylos, a widow named Thea found her sitting by the well at dusk. The stranger's head was bowed, her shoulders curved inward as if protecting something broken. "Mother," Thea said gently, using the term of respect for the elderly, "have you nowhere to go?" Demeter looked up. Her eyes, despite the disguise, held depths that made the widow step back. "I had somewhere once, but it is lost to me now." "Then come. My house is small, but my hearth is warm." That night Thea shared her bread, hard and coarse, but given freely. They sat together in silence, two women who understood that grief is sometimes easier to bear in company, even wordless company. "You've lost someone," Thea said eventually. It was not a question. "My daughter." "Dead?" "Taken, which may be worse. Death at least has finality, but taken," Demeter's voice cracked. "Taken means she exists somewhere I cannot reach, somewhere I cannot help her." Thea nodded slowly. "I had a son. The sea took him 3 winters past. For months I waited at the shore, thinking he might return, but the sea keeps what it claims." "And how did you bear it?" "I didn't, not at first, but eventually," the widow stared into the fire, "eventually I learned that love doesn't end when presence does. I still love him. I still speak to him in the dark hours. He lives in me, even if he lives nowhere else." Demeter said nothing. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had turned cold. When morning came, Demeter left a small blessing behind. The widow would find her jars fuller than they should be, her grain lasting longer than expected. It was all the thanks she could offer, all the grace she could still summon. She saw how humans carried their grief, not as thunder, but as quiet persistence. A mother murmuring over an empty cradle, a farmer sowing seed in ground already frozen, out of hope rather than expectation. In the town of Argos, she encountered a young father trying to comfort his hungry children. The youngest wept, clutching her belly. The man's face was gaunt, desperate. "Please," he said to Demeter, mistaking her for a wise woman,
Do you know any prayers, any offerings that might restore the harvest? The gods have turned their faces from us." "The gods," Demeter said bitterly, "care nothing for your suffering. They feast on Olympus while you starve." The man flinched at her vehemence. "Then what are we to do?" She looked at the children, their thin arms, their haunted eyes. Once she would have blessed them without thought, would have touched their heads and filled their bellies, made the grain bins overflow. But now she felt only the echoing void where her daughter should be. If she must suffer, why should the world not suffer with her? "Survive," she said flatly, "if you can." She walked away, leaving the father staring after her in confusion and fear. In their small, enduring ways, mortals were mirrors of her. The goddess of plenty, stripped of abundance, began to understand something new, that to suffer mortality is not a punishment, it is a kind of intimacy with the world. But still she searched. She asked the travelers on the roads, the beggars by the bridges, the shepherds half asleep in the cold hills. "Have you seen a girl who walked with spring? Have you seen a laughter that smells of rain and green?" They shook their heads. Some pitied her, some feared her, though they did not know why. Nights lengthened further. Dew hardened to frost. The rivers slowed in their beds. Each village she passed through found the cold deeper after her leaving, for grief follows grief, and loss multiplies itself in silence.
At last, Demeter came to a small town by the sea, a place of low fields and salt winds, where even in the best seasons the soil was stingy. Yet the people were kind there, or weary enough to know kindness was all they could afford. They found her sitting by a well, hood drawn low, gaze fixed on the water that no longer rippled. When they asked her name, she gave none, only that she sought shelter. A woman named Metanira took her in, queen of Eleusis, though her kingdom was humble. She was middle-aged, with a face marked by years of hard summers and lean winters, but her eyes held warmth. "Come," Metanira said, "you look as though you've walked the length of the world." "And found nothing," Demeter replied. Metanira led her to a modest house of clay and timber. Inside, firelight danced across worn but clean walls. Children's voices echoed from the back rooms, the sound of life continuing despite hardship. "My youngest," Metanira explained, gesturing to a cradle where an infant slept. "Demephon, born just before the harvests began to fail." She looked at the child with fierce love. "I fear for what kind of world he'll grow into." Demeter approached the cradle. The baby slept with fists curled, perfect and vulnerable. Something twisted in her chest, not quite softening, but recognition. This woman, too, knew what it meant to love something fragile, to fear for what could be lost. "Let me help you," Demeter said. "I may have lost my own child, but perhaps I can tend yours." Metanira hesitated, sensing something strange in the offer, but exhaustion and hope won out. "If you wish it. His nurse fell ill last week, and I have the other children to care for." And so Demeter stayed. In mortal housework, the goddess found strange solace. She ground grain with mortal hands, swept floors, folded linens still warm from the hearth. Each task drew her closer to the echo of her daughter, that sense of purpose in the smallest acts of care. The other children watched her warily at first, 3 older boys who sensed something otherworldly in the quiet stranger. But she was patient with them, answering their questions, mending their torn clothes, teaching them small songs she remembered from ages past. At night, by the fire's glow, she would cradle Demephon in her lap. She saw the faint shine of divinity still clinging to her touch despite her disguise, and grief twisted into something wild and tender. She thought, if I cannot restore what was mine, perhaps I can preserve what remains. So she began the ritual. Each night, when all others slept, she laid the child in the flames, not to harm, but to purify, to make him eternal. She anointed him with ambrosia drawn from her own essence, whispered the secret names of rebirth. The child slept unburned, wrapped in gold light that transformed his mortal flesh cell by cell. Night by night, death's claim on him weakened. Night by night, he became something more than human. Metanira noticed the change. Her son grew stronger, healthier, more beautiful than any mortal infant should be. His skin gleamed, his eyes held unusual depth. "What do you feed him?" she asked Demeter one morning. "He thrives while the rest of us grow thin." "Only care," Demeter said, not quite lying. "And love. Sometimes that is enough." But humanity does not always understand what gods attempt in love. One night, Metanira woke to a strange glow emanating from the main room. She rose quietly, moved toward the light, and looked through the doorway. Her son lay in the hearth. Flames rose around him, golden and impossible. The stranger, the old woman she'd taken in, knelt before the fire, her hands raised, her lips moving in words that made the air itself tremble. For a moment, Metanira simply stared, unable to process what she saw. Then instinct overwhelmed reason. "No!" she screamed, rushing forward. "Monster! You would destroy my child!" The spell shattered. The flames guttered, the golden light vanished. The child woke and began to cry, a normal, mortal cry. Demeter drew back from the hearth, the illusion falling away. The old woman's form dissolved, revealing the goddess beneath, tall, radiant, terrible in her grief. Grain stalks wove through her hair. Her eyes held the accumulated sorrow of the search, the rage of a mother denied. The room flared with harvest light. Metanira fell back, shielding her eyes. "Blind creature!" Demeter's voice filled every corner, resonant with divine displeasure. "You call me destroyer when I would have made him deathless. You do not see the shape of love when it burns." I didn't know," Metanira stammered, clutching her now mortal son to her chest. "You knew enough to be afraid, and fear makes you reject the gift I offered." Demeter's expression hardened. "Then let mortality have its due." She raised her hand, and the very walls trembled. "Your fields will not wake first come spring. Your soil will remember what you refused. Let this place teach all mortals that to reject divine grace has consequence." "Please," Metanira whispered, tears streaming. "He's just a child." "And my daughter is just a girl." The words tore from Demeter like thunder. "Yet she is taken, hidden, stolen into darkness, and not one of you mortals lifts a finger to help." Her radiance faded, sadness overtaking fury. She looked down at the frightened woman before her, voice soft now. "But perhaps it is not meant for mortals to escape loss. Perhaps mortality is not curse, but simply the shape of things when gods do not intervene." She turned away. "Keep your son, love him while you can, but remember, every moment you have with him is a gift, and gifts can be withdrawn." As she walked into the night, she heard Metanira sobbing behind her.
but she did not stop, could not stop. Outside, the fields of Eleusis lay still under the moon. Demeter placed her hand upon the soil. The earth did not stir. Not even her touch could rouse it now. And in that stillness, winter deepened.
Demeter walked for days after leaving Eleusis. Her path was erratic, driven not by plan, but by grief's momentum. She moved through forests where oak trees groaned in wind that had turned sharp. She crossed rivers that ran sluggish, their currents confused. She climbed mountains that seemed to lean away from her approach. Everywhere she went, the world responded to her sorrow. This was not intentional, not at first. She did not consciously will the withering, the cooling, the slow cessation of growth. But divinity does not distinguish between feeling and manifestation. What she felt, the world reflected.
On the third day after Eleusis, Pan found her. The wild god appeared from a grove of dying aspens, his pipes hanging silent at his side. His usually jovial expression was grave. "Lady Demeter," he said, voice uncharacteristically gentle, "the woods are growing quiet. The animals hide. Even the wild things sense that something is wrong." "Then they are wiser than gods," Demeter replied, without stopping. Pan fell into step beside her. "I would help if I could. What you seek is beyond help, beyond finding, beyond every power this world possesses. Perhaps music might ease." "Ease?" Demeter stopped walking, turned to face him. "You think music can ease this? My daughter is stolen, taken by darkness into places I cannot reach, and you offer me songs?" Pan's hands tightened on his pipes, but he did not flinch. "Pain that cannot be healed can still be borne. Music helps with the bearing." "I do not want to bear it. I want to end it. I want the world to understand what has been lost." "The world is beginning to understand," Pan said quietly. "Look around you." Demeter looked. The forest stretched in every direction, but it was changing. Leaves that should have held for another month were falling early. The undergrowth had lost its vitality. Even the moss seemed gray, depleted. "This is my grief made manifest," she said. "Let it spread. Let every living thing feel what I feel. Let the earth itself mourn." "Demeter, leave me, Pan. Your woods are dying and I cannot stop it. I don't want to stop it." The wild god studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he lifted his pipes to his lips and played. Not a cheerful tune, but something slow and aching, a melody that understood sorrow without trying to fix it. When he finished, he lowered the pipes and met her eyes. "The world will mourn with you, lady, but remember, even grief must end eventually. Even winter learns to yield. Not this one. This winter is forever until she returns." Pan faded back into the dying trees, leaving her alone once more.
That evening, Iris appeared, the rainbow messenger, radiant even in the gathering gloom. She descended on wings of colored light, carrying scrolls sealed with Zeus's mark. She knelt before Demeter with practiced grace. "Great Demeter, the Olympians send greetings. They request your presence at council to discuss." Demeter took the scrolls without opening them and cast them into a nearby stream. They dissolved instantly, ink bleeding into water like diluted blood. "Tell them," she said, her voice level and cold, "that I have no words for those who stand by while children are stolen. Tell Zeus that if he values his throne, if he values the worship of mortals who will soon have nothing left to offer, he will return my daughter. Until then, I have nothing to say to any of them." "Please, goddess," Iris's voice held genuine distress. "The mortals are beginning to starve. The animals grow thin. Even the gods feel. Let them feel. Let them starve. Let every living thing understand what it means when balance is broken, when sacred bonds are severed." Demeter's eyes blazed. "For eons I have fed this world without pause, without question. I have asked nothing in return. Now I ask one thing, and I am denied. So let the world learn the price of that denial. The King of Gods himself commands. I do not recognize his commands, not anymore, not while he permits my daughter to be held in darkness." Iris rose, her wings dimming. "I must deliver your refusal. Then deliver this as well. Every day Persephone remains below, I will withdraw further. Every seed that might have woken will sleep eternal. Every field that might have greened will lie barren. Tell Zeus that winter is not a season, it is an ultimatum." The messenger fled, trailing colors that seemed muted against the gray sky. More came. The Horae, goddesses of the seasons, appeared in procession, spring with her flowers withering in hand, summer with her fruit turning to ash, autumn dropping leaves that crumbled to dust before reaching the ground. "Sister Demeter," Spring pleaded, her voice the sound of melting snow, "we cannot function without you. The cycle is breaking. We are meant to turn in harmony." "Harmony?" laughed Demeter, bitter and broken. "There is no harmony while my daughter suffers. Let the cycle break. Let every carefully ordered pattern shatter." Summer stepped forward, her warmth already dimming. "But the mortals allowed this. Zeus allowed this. The entire cosmic order allowed this. If order itself is complicit in my daughter's abduction, then let order burn." Autumn spoke last. Her voice was rust and resignation. "You would unmake creation because you grieve? I would unmake creation because grief is all I have left." Demeter's voice dropped to a whisper more terrifying than her shouts. "Without her, there is no purpose. Without her, abundance is meaningless. If I cannot tend my daughter, why should I tend anything?" The Horae departed, helpless before her immovable sorrow. As they left, Spring looked back once, her expression heavy with understanding. She too knew what it meant to fade when the world turned cold. Finally, on the 7th day after Eleusis, Demeter stopped walking. She stood in a barren field that had once been fertile, now cracked and dry despite the season. Around her, the last green things were dying, not from natural causes, but from the absence of her will to keep them alive. She knelt and pressed both hands against the soil. "Hear me," she whispered to the earth itself. "Hear me, every root and seed, every living thing that grows or hopes to grow. I am your keeper, and I am done." The words fell into the ground like stones into water, rippling outward through fungal networks and root systems, through the vast communication web of green things. "No more shall you wake at my touch. No more shall you answer to my care. You will sleep now. Sleep until the world makes right what has been wronged. Until my daughter returns to me, you will lie dormant. This is not request. This is command." And the earth listened. Across fields and forests, across valleys and mountains, every seed felt her withdrawal. The pulse that had driven growth since creation began, that steady heartbeat of green and bloom, fell silent. Seeds that had swelled with readiness to sprout instead contracted, curling inward. They would wait,
wait through cold and dark, wait through prayers and offerings, wait until the goddess who gave them life decided they could live again. This was not mere absence, it was active refusal, a curse spoken in the language of roots and soil. Trees that should have budded in spring would stand bare, vines that should have climbed would wither on their trellises, grain that should have ripened would rot in the ground, untransformed. Demeter stood, looking at what she had done. The field lay dead before her, and she felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not regret, only the vast hollow space where love had been. "Come back to me," she whispered to the distant darkness where her daughter dwelt. "Come back, and I will restore everything. But until then," she let the sentence hang unfinished. The world would finish it for her. Winter, the first true winter, born not of seasonal change, but from divine grief, settled its weight across the land, and it would not lift until Persephone returned.
When Demeter wept, her tears sank into the ground, and where they fell, life withdrew. The earth mirrored her grief like a lover echoing loss. Crops failed first in the valleys, then on the plains. Seeds, sensing the sorrow that now ruled their keeper, refused to wake. Trees held their fruit until it shriveled on the branch, unwilling to let go into a world so cold. Animals grew thin. Deer wandered through forests empty of browse. Birds flew south and found no warmth waiting. Rabbits huddled in their warrens, fur thick but bellies empty. Rivers froze nearer their sources than they ever had. Ice crept down from the mountains, claiming territory that had known only flowing water for eons. Fish died in the shallows, their bodies locked in frost. Even the wind seemed to tire of carrying breath. It moved sluggishly, without conviction, as if uncertain whether motion itself was worthwhile. It was not wrath that caused this, nor vengeance. It was alignment, the world simply becoming what she felt. When divinity and emotion share one pulse, matter itself changes shape. Mortals came to her then, farmers, priests, wanderers, pleading for relief. They brought offerings, the last of their grain, precious metals, even their own blood spilled in supplication. They lit fires on every hilltop, called her name in every language they knew. But smoke rose into a sky that no longer answered. The earth had closed its ears. Demeter walked among their fields, hearing only silence. It was too late. The cycle had stopped turning. In their huts, mortals whispered stories that the goddess had been betrayed, that the world must atone. They created new prayers, new rituals, desperate innovations to appease powers they could not understand. But there was no prime that could be undone, no rite that could compel return. Demeter's sorrow was larger than prayer, deeper than magic, more absolute than any force they could imagine.
She went to the edge of a canyon one dusk, the sky iron gray. Below, an animal lay dead, a bird, its feathers already glazed with frost. She looked at it and thought of her daughter's laughter, how it had once awakened every morning's light. She whispered into the cold air, "Even the gods can lose what they cannot command." The air did not reply, but somewhere very deep, far beneath her feet, the faintest echo answered, not in words, but in pulse, something living, unseen, still breathing. On Olympus, the laughter had stopped. The altars that once smoked with offerings stood bare, The prayers of mortals had grown thin, replaced by silence and starvation. Zeus, who ruled by order, not affection, felt the weight of absence pressing upward from the mortal world. For the first time since creation, the line between divine permanence and mortal decay had blurred. If mortals died entirely, who would worship? Who would remember the gods existed? One by one, the gods gathered in the great hall. No one had called the council, yet all came, drawn by the same uneasy awareness that something fundamental had broken. Poseidon looked to the seas, where waves faltered and fish lay still beneath glassy water. Even the depths feel it, the currents slow, life retreats. Apollo's lyre sounded dull, its strings numb to melody. Music cannot move what has ceased to feel. The world grows deaf to beauty. Aphrodite paced, her usual grace agitated. Desire withers where there is no hope. Love requires belief in tomorrow, and mortals no longer believe. Athena stood apart, calculating. This is not sustainable. If the mortals perish, our power diminishes. We exist in relation to them, whether we acknowledge it or not. Hera, unexpectedly, spoke with sympathy. A mother's grief. I understand it, even if I do not condone the method. Zeus, you should not have permitted. Permitted? Zeus's voice was thunder held barely in check. You think I permitted this? Hades acted according to ancient rites. The underworld is his domain. I have no authority there. Yet you could have prevented it before it began, Hera said quietly. Zeus said nothing. The silence was admission enough. It was not Demeter's rage they feared, but her emptiness. A mother's grief had undone the structure of the world, and none of them, not Zeus with his lightning, not Poseidon with his seas, not even Athena with her wisdom, knew how to repair what profound sorrow had broken. Zeus sent messengers into the shadows to find what had happened, to bargain, to restore the rhythm that had been lost, but none dared pass into the deep places. The gates of the underworld had sealed like a wound, and even the gods could not force them open by will alone. Hermes, the messenger, the only one who moved freely between realms, stood before Zeus's throne. The boundaries sealed from within, he reported. Hades does not answer calls from above. He tends his realm in silence. Then you must descend, Zeus commanded. Use the pathways granted to you. Find what keeps the girl below. Learn what might persuade her to return. Hermes bowed, but his expression was troubled. What if she does not wish to return? The question hung in the air like smoke. Zeus closed his eyes. If she does not wish to return, then we are all lost, because Demeter will not yield, and without her the world ends, not in fire or flood, but in slow, cold silence, in eternal winter. For everywhere, both above and below, there was stillness, and in that stillness, the first winter, time learned to wait.
There was no fire, no scream, no endless pit of torment, only a descent that felt like deep sleep. Persephone floated through darkness soft as breath. The weight of the world above fell away. Her body became light, her pulse slow and even. Around her hummed a great, patient silence. The chariot's wheels no longer touched stone, or perhaps stone here was different, more yielding. The horses moved through shadow as if through water, their hooves making no sound. She was aware of Hades beside her, his presence cool and still, but he did not speak, did not touch her beyond the necessary steadying hand. Time stretched strange. The descent might have lasted moments or hours. She had no way to measure. All she knew was the gradual shift from terror to numbness to something quieter. Curiosity, perhaps, or the calm that comes after panic exhausts itself. When they finally stopped, she found herself standing on solid ground. The chariot had vanished, or perhaps transformed into the stone floor beneath her feet. The horses, too, had faded into the general darkness. She was alone. No, not alone. Hades stood at a distance, giving her space, watching with those ancient eyes. "Where am I?" Her voice sounded strange, muffled, as if spoken underwater. "The threshold," he said. "The entrance to my realm. You can go no further without choosing to." "Choosing?" She laughed, bitter. "I was taken." "You were invited. You chose to touch the flower. You chose to take my hand." His tone held no triumph, only statement. "But this," he gestured to the vast darkness behind him, "this you must choose deliberately. If you turn back now, I will return you. The earth will open. You will see sunlight again." She stared at him, searching for deception, but his face held only patient waiting. "And if I go forward? Then you will see what lies beneath all things, the truth that growth tries to forget." Persephone looked back the way they'd come. She could feel it, the surface world so close, her mother's warmth calling, the fields waiting, spring postponed but not forgotten. Then she looked forward into the darkness that was not quite darkness, and she felt that other pull, the one she'd been feeling for years, the call from below, from depth, from the hidden places. "Show me," she said. Hades inclined his head. "As you wish." He turned and walked into the shadow. After a moment's hesitation, Persephone followed. When she awoke, she must have slept, though she didn't remember sleeping. She lay upon a stone floor smooth as still water. Silver mists drifted in slow circles. Shadows moved with the rhythm of tides unseen. The air held no scent, no wind, and yet it was not dead. It was alive in another key, quieter, deliberate, the way winter carries its own form of life beneath the frost. She rose slowly. Her first step echoed for miles, or perhaps only for herself. In this place, distance was a suggestion more than a rule. She saw no monsters, only shades, the faint outlines of those who had lived and departed. They gathered near her like leaves drawn towards warmth. Their murmurs brushed her skin, 1,000 half-remembered names dissolving together into the hush. They did not touch her, but they bowed slightly, recognition without cause. In their eyes was something like relief, and so she understood. They knew her name before she spoke it. Somehow, this realm had been waiting for her. He came not in thunder, not as a conqueror, but as stillness given shape. The sound of his approach was an absence, a parting of the mist, a shift in the pulse of the ground. His face was pale as the stone itself. His eyes held no flame, only depth. He regarded her not as captive nor as guest, simply as one who had crossed a boundary he tended. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, his voice low, even like earth speaking through rain, "You are here." Persephone did not answer immediately. The silence hung between them, a third presence, alive, examining them both. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why me? Why this?" Hades did not look away, did not offer easy explanations. "Because in all of eternity, nothing has lived as you do, with curiosity that reaches deeper than safety allows, with questions that honor both light and shadow." He paused. "Because you were the first living thing I saw who did not flinch from the idea of endings.
I flinched from you. From surprise, perhaps, not from what I represent. She couldn't deny that. Even now, standing in the realm of death, she felt less terrified than she should. The underworld was not what she'd expected, not torture chambers and screaming souls, just quietness, vastness, a kind of peace that came from having already surrendered everything. "Am I prisoner?" she asked. "Are you?" He gestured to the vast hall that spread behind him. Torches burned with ghost light, neither fire nor glow, but a memory of light. Columns rose like frozen trees, and at their base rivers threaded through stone, black water that reflected nothing. "I could bind you, but I have not. I could command you, but I will not. This realm needs no unwilling queen." "Then what do you want from me?" "To show you, to let you understand, and then, if you choose to leave, I will help you find the way." She studied his face, looking for deception, for the trap she'd been taught must exist. But she found only the same lonely patience she'd glimpsed in that first moment before the earth split. "I would understand what this place is, what you are." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close, relief perhaps, or hope. He turned, gestured toward the path that wound downward, past doors carved with scenes of endings and beginnings entwined. "This is not your prison," he said as they walked. "It is the part of the world unseen, the completion half of every beginning, the silence after every song." She followed, not in obedience, but in curiosity. The path wound through halls where shades drifted, where rivers whispered in languages she almost understood, where the architecture seemed to shift between stone and memory. The underworld did not consume her, it received her. And in that receiving, she began to listen.
Hades showed her his realm with the care of a gardener showing his garden, not to boast, but to share what he had tended for eons. They walked first to the river Styx, black as starless sky, its waters swift and certain. "This is where oaths are bound," Hades explained. "What is sworn upon the Styx cannot be broken, not by gods, not by mortals, not even by time itself. The river remembers everything promised and holds the promiser to account." Persephone knelt at its edge, trailing her fingers, near but not touching the surface. She could feel the weight of it, the gravity of absolute commitment. "Even gods fear it," she said. "Especially gods. We who live forever have much to lose from unbreakable promises." They came next to Acheron, the river of woe, where the newly dead first arrived. A ferry waited there, tended by an ancient figure hunched at the oars. "Charon," Hades said quietly. "He has ferried souls since before I claimed this realm. He does not answer to me precisely. He simply performs his function." The ferryman looked up, nodded once at Hades, then turned his attention to Persephone. His eyes were like holes in the world, seeing everything and nothing. "She is not dead," Charon said, his voice like creaking wood. "No," Hades agreed. "Why is she here?" "She chose to see." The ferryman studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, an expression both terrible and kind. "Then she is braver than most who take my ferry." Deeper still, to the river Lethe, waters clear as glass, where souls came to forget pain. "Those who wish to release their pain," Hades said, "drink from here.
Their memories dissolve, names, loves, sorrows, all wash away. They become peaceful, but empty. "Is that mercy?" Persephone asked, watching shades line up to drink, their faces already fading. "Sometimes, but also loss. They forget pain, yes, but also joy. Forget wounds, but also healing. Forget everything that made them who they were." His voice carried unexpected sorrow. "I do not force them to drink, but many choose it. Perhaps that is the saddest part." "You wish they would remember?" "I wish they could bear remembering, but not all pain should be endured. Sometimes forgetting is the only kindness left." They passed the river Phlegethon, where flames ran like water, purifying souls who needed cleansing before they could rest, and the river Cocytus, where lamentation echoed endless, where those who died with unbearable regret wept their grief into the current. "5 rivers," Persephone said, "each serving a different aspect of death. Death is not one thing. It is ending, yes, but also transformation, passage, release, memory, forgetting, justice, mercy. All of these exist here, braided together like waters flowing to the same sea." Finally, they reached 3 vast meadows. First, Asphodel, stretching gray and endless. Here the ordinary dead wandered in peaceful monotony, not suffering, but not truly alive either, just existing. "Most souls come here," Hades said, "those who were neither exceptionally virtuous nor exceptionally wicked. They drift, content enough, remembering their lives like distant dreams." Persephone walked among them, the shades parted before her, bowing slightly. One reached out, a woman who had been a baker, perhaps, her hands still shaped to the memory of kneading dough. "You carry sunlight," the shade whispered. "I remember sunlight." "Tell me about it," Persephone said gently. The shade smiled faintly. "Warm, golden, it made the bread rise, made my daughter laugh." She paused. "I miss my daughter." "She misses you too," though she had no way of knowing, but it seemed the right thing to say, and the shade's expression cleared, becoming peaceful. Hades watched this exchange with something like wonder. Beyond Asphodel lay Elysium, the blessed fields where heroes and the virtuous dwelt. Here the light was brighter, not sunlight, but close. Golden meadows stretched eternal, and laughter echoed among pillared halls. "Paradise," Persephone said. "Of a sort, but notice nothing grows here, nothing changes. They are happy, yes, but static, frozen in their best moment, unable to become anything more." She saw it then, the subtle stagnation beneath the beauty, the heroes sparring with the same perfect forms eternally, the lovers kissing but never growing closer, joy without depth, pleasure without meaning. "Even paradise can be a prison," she murmured. "Everything can be, if it lasts forever without transformation." Finally, from a distance, they glimpsed Tartarus, not visited, but observed from the edge, a vast pit where the truly wicked suffered punishment, where those who had committed unforgivable acts faced eternal consequence. "I do not enjoy that place," Hades said quietly, "but some actions require response. Some pain must be answered with pain. It is not vengeance, it is balance, the universe keeping its accounts." "Do you judge them? Decide who goes where?" "No. 3 judges, Minos,
Rhadamanthus and Aeacus weigh each soul. I only maintain the structure, ensure the rivers flow, the gates hold, the divisions remain clear. He looked at her. Your mother builds, I maintain what has been built. Is there no creation here, only maintenance? Death is transformation, that is creation enough. He paused. Or it was, until you arrived. What do you mean? You brought something this realm has never known, not life precisely, but possibility. The dead respond to you differently than they do to me. You remind them what they lost, yes, but also why it mattered. You make them feel again, even here where feeling should be finished. Persephone looked around at the vast realm, the rivers, the meadows, and countless souls finding their places in the architecture of after. It was not chaos, not cruelty. It was simply the other half of existence, and she was beginning to understand that both halves were necessary.
Days, though time had little meaning here, passed quietly. The mists parted when she walked. The dead whispered fewer laments in her presence. She learned their names, each fading like an echo on wind. She found that when she spoke to them softly, the waters in the river stilled. When she reached her hand toward a wandering shade, its form steadied, clear for a moment before dissolving again. One morning, she found an old woman weeping by the Cocytus, the river of lamentation. "What troubles you?" Persephone asked gently. The shade looked up, her face translucent with tears that had no substance. "I cannot find my husband. We died together, but the judges sent us to different places. He to Elysium for his valor, I to Asphodel for my ordinariness." "Do you wish to forget him? The lethe can ease that pain." "Never." The shade's vehemence gave her temporary solidity. "The pain is all I have left of love. I would rather hurt forever than forget what we shared." Persephone felt something twist in her chest. She looked to Hades, who had been watching from a distance. "Can anything be done?" she asked him. "The judgments are final. The divisions serve order. But does order serve love?" Hades studied her, then the weeping shade. Finally he sighed, a sound like wind through empty halls. "This once," he said, "because you ask." He raised his hand and a path appeared, a silvery bridge arcing from Asphodel to Elysium. The shade gasped, seeing it, then ran toward it without another word, calling her husband's name. "Thank you," Persephone said. "Do not make it a habit," Hades replied, "but perhaps the rules can bend sometimes when love demands it." Another day, a young soldier approached her, confusion written across his translucent features. "I don't understand," he said. "One moment I was fighting, the next I was here. Did I run? Did I abandon my brothers?" "How did you die?" Persephone asked. "An arrow through the heart. I didn't even see it coming." "Then you did not run. You fell fighting. There is no shame in that." "But I feel shame. I feel like I should have done more, been more." Persephone thought carefully. "In life, we are never enough. We always wish we'd been braver, kinder, more. But death is the place where enough finds its meaning. You fought. You stood with your brothers. You ended with honor. That is enough." The soldier's form began to solidify, to settle. "Enough," he repeated. "I was enough." "You were enough." He nodded slowly, then turned toward Asphodel, walking now with purpose instead of confusion. Hades watched from the shadows. "You have a gift for this." "For what?" "For helping them understand what they are now, what they have become. I can guide them to their places, but you
You help them accept those places, make peace with endings. Isn't that what death should be? Not punishment, but peace? Perhaps, but peace is harder to grant than judgment. You do it naturally. A third time, a child approached her, small, uncertain, barely visible against the mists. "Are you the spring lady?" the child asked. Persephone knelt to be at eye level. "I suppose I am. What is your name?" I don't remember. I've been here a long time." "How did you come here?" "I was sick. It hurt. Then Mother was crying. And then I was here." "Is Mother here too?" Persephone's heart broke. She hadn't known hearts could break in the underworld, but hers did. "No, little one. Your mother is still alive. Will she come here someday?" "Eventually. All living things do." "Will I remember her when she comes?" Persephone hesitated. The child had already forgotten so much: name, face, the specifics of life. By the time the mother arrived, decades or centuries might have passed. The child might be nothing but mist. But she could not say that, not to those wide, hopeful eyes. "Love remembers," she said instead. "Even when names fade, even when faces blur, love remembers. When your mother comes, something in you will know her." The child nodded, content with this answer, and drifted back into the gray meadows. Hades appeared beside her. "You lied. I gave comfort. Is that not the same as lying? Sometimes mercy and truth are not the same thing." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are teaching me," he said quietly, "how to tend this realm with compassion instead of merely order. I have ruled here since before mortals learned to count their days, and I never thought to comfort them, only to sort them, organize them, ensure they reach their proper places." "Maybe that's why I'm here," Persephone said, "to remind you that even the dead need tenderness." "Maybe," Hades agreed, "or maybe the realm itself brought you here because it was tired of being ruled by logic alone." Each day, Persephone moved more easily through the underworld. The dead began to gather when she passed, not in supplication, but in greeting. They called her Kore still, but some whispered another name too, Queen. Not because Hades had named her so, but because she had earned it through care. She was not captured, she was becoming. And Hades, watching her work, watching her transform his realm, not through command but through presence, felt something shift in his ancient heart. She was not just life visiting death, she was the bridge between them, the proof that they were not opposites but partners. And he was beginning to understand that he loved her, not for what she could give him, but for what she was teaching him, that even in endings there could be gentleness, that even in shadow there could be grace.
The temptation builds. Time moved strangely in the underworld. Days and nights had no meaning where the sun never reached. Persephone couldn't say how long she had been below. Weeks, perhaps, or months, or maybe only hours stretched by the weight of eternity. She had grown accustomed to the silver mist, the soft whisper of rivers, the gentle murmuring of shades. Her eyes had adjusted to the subtle light that came from nowhere and everywhere. Even her heartbeat had slowed to match the realm's patient rhythm. But something was changing in her. She felt herself becoming more translucent, more shadow than substance. When she looked at her hands, they seemed half there, flickering at the edges like candle flame. "You're fading," Hades said one evening, though evening and morning were merely concepts that used to structure the timeless hours. He stood at the entrance to the throne room, his expression unreadable. "I feel light," Persephone admitted, "as if I might drift away if I don't concentrate on being here." "You are still of the living world. Your body remembers life, breath, pulse, growth. It doesn't understand how to exist here permanently. Will I disappear? Eventually, or you will have to return. His jaw tightened. I will not keep you here to watch you fade into nothing. But I'm not ready to leave. The words surprised her even as she spoke them. I haven't finished. There's still so much to understand. So many souls who need... She trailed off, uncertain how to explain. But in the weeks, or months, or whatever time had passed, she had found something unexpected in the underworld. Purpose. The dead needed tending as much as any living thing. Their confusion, their sorrow, their slow acceptance of what they had become, all of it called to something deep within her. She had also found, though she barely admitted it to herself, that she didn't want to leave Hades, the dark king with his patient silences and unexpected gentleness, the way he tended his realm with the same care her mother gave to fields, the loneliness that mirrored her own growing understanding that to be powerful is often to be isolated. There might be a way, Hades said carefully, for you to belong here, to anchor yourself to this realm so you don't fade. How? He gestured towards the throne room. Come, let me show you. They walked together through corridors carved from living stone. Persephone had learned that the palace itself was not built, but grown, crystallized from the will of the first beings, shaped by time and darkness into something between architecture and organism. They arrived at a garden. She hadn't known the underworld had gardens. It lay in a courtyard open to the gray sky, filled with pale flowers that grew without soil, asphodel and white poppy, ghostly roses that gave off soft light. In the center, on a simple stone table, sat a pomegranate. It looked impossibly real, the only thing in all the underworld that held true color. Its skin gleamed deep red, almost purple, with the faint blush of living fruit. Dew still clung to its surface. Persephone approached slowly, drawn by something deeper than hunger. The pomegranate seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, warm and vital in this realm of cool stillness. "Where did this come from?" she whispered. "I don't know," Hades admitted. "I came here this morning and found it waiting. Nothing grows in the underworld that hasn't died first, yet here it is, alive, present, impossible." He moved to stand beside her, careful not to touch her, but close enough that she could feel the coolness of his presence. "In all my eons here, I have never seen its like. I think, perhaps, the realm itself placed it here." "Why?" "An offering, or an answer." He paused. "There are old laws, Persephone, older than the gods, carved into the fabric of existence. One such law, what is consumed of the underworld binds it to the consumer. Eating of death makes one part of death." She stared at the fruit, understanding dawning. "If I eat this, you would belong here, truly belong, not as visitor or prisoner, but as resident, as one who has claim to this realm." "Would I still be able to return above?" "I don't know. The law is unclear. Perhaps you would be divided, belonging to both, wholly to neither. Perhaps you would be trapped here forever." His voice dropped lower. "Perhaps something else entirely. The law was never meant to apply to the living." "Then why show me this? Why give me this choice?" Hades turned to face her fully. In the pale garden light, his face was no longer stern or distant, but vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "Because keeping you here destroys what I value most about you, your life, your light, the fact that you choose every moment, every action, rather than simply existing. But letting you go entirely." He closed his eyes. "Letting you go means returning to the solitude I didn't know was unbearable until you arrived." "So
You're asking me to trap myself here? To give up everything I was? No. His eyes opened, meeting hers with startling intensity. I'm asking you to choose freely, with full knowledge of the consequences. Choose to return to your mother, to sunlight, to the living world, and I will help you find a way. Or choose to stay, knowing it may cost you everything, and I will accept that gift with full understanding of what you sacrifice. That's not fair, Persephone said, but without anger. How can I choose between two halves of myself? Perhaps, Hades said softly, because both halves are real, and denying either one would be a different kind of death.
The choice. Persephone was alone in the garden. Hades had left her to decide, understanding that this choice could not be made in the presence of the one who wanted her to stay. She sat on the stone bench, staring at the pomegranate. Its scent reached her, sweet and strange, carrying notes of earth and ash and something indefinable. Her mouth watered, not from physical hunger, she'd barely felt that down here, but from a deeper need. The need to belong somewhere, to commit, to become rather than simply be. She thought of her mother, the warmth of her embrace, the patient teaching, the absolute security of being loved without question. Tears pricked her eyes. Demeter would be searching, would be grief-stricken, would be... But Demeter had also smothered her, hadn't she? Not intentionally, not cruelly, but with a love so complete had left no room for Persephone to discover who she might be apart from being daughter. Every question about darkness had been met with gentle dismissal. Every curiosity about what lay beneath had been redirected toward the light. Her mother loved the surface world, but Persephone had learned something here in the depths. The surface was only half the story. She thought of the souls she'd helped, the old woman reunited with her husband, weeping with joy in the asphodel fields, the young soldier who'd finally laid down his fear, the child who'd stopped crying because Persephone had explained that death was not punishment, only passage. They needed her, or they needed someone like her, someone who remembered life vividly enough to offer comfort, but understood death deeply enough to offer truth. She thought of Hades, the way he'd shown her his realm, not his kingdom to be ruled, but his garden to be tended. The conversations that stretched through timeless hours, philosophical and honest in ways she'd never experienced. The loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own growing understanding that to be powerful is to be set apart. He had taken her, yes, but he hadn't kept her. He had offered her choice at every turn, even when it meant risking loss. That, perhaps, was what love looked like when it wasn't trying to possess. She picked up the pomegranate. Its weight was satisfying, solid, real, significant. "If I eat this," she said aloud to the empty garden, "I choose division. I choose to be torn between worlds. I choose the ache of belonging nowhere completely, of being always pulled between light and shadow. Is that what I want?" The garden offered no answer, but deep within herself she felt it, the truth she'd been circling since the first moment she'd felt the earth's deeper pulse beneath her mother's fields. Yes, she wanted both. She wanted the impossible wholeness of holding contradictions together, life and death, light and dark, surface and depth. She wanted to be the bridge, the threshold, the meeting place where opposites discovered they were not opposites at all, but halves of one continuous breath. She split the pomegranate open. The seeds inside gleamed like garnets, like drops of blood, like tiny hearts. They smelled of earth and autumn, and endings that were also beginnings. "I choose both," she whispered, "and if the world can't hold that, if the law can't contain it, then let the law change, let the world change. Let me be the proof that boundaries are not walls, but doorways."
She lifted the first seed to her lips and ate it. The taste exploded across her tongue, sweet and tart and bitter and rich all at once. It tasted like depth, like truth, like the flavor of choosing for herself rather than being chosen. She ate another and another. 6 seeds total. 6 not because of numerology or cosmic significance, but simply because after 6 she felt complete, full, anchored. The moment the 6th seed touched her tongue, she felt it, the bond forming, roots sinking through her essence, connecting her irrevocably to the underworld. Not chains, roots, the kind that feed as much as they bind. The garden shuddered. The pale flowers suddenly glowed brighter. The gray sky overhead split with a crack of light, not sunlight, but something else. Starlight, perhaps, or the gleam of possibility made manifest. And on her head, materializing from the air itself, appeared a crown. Not placed by external hands, but grown from her own decision, woven of asphodel and silver, from choice and consequence, from the marriage of opposites she'd just made real. She stood, feeling the weight of it, the rightness. She was no longer entirely maiden, no longer entirely goddess of surface. She had become something new, queen of the underworld, chosen not by capture but by her own deliberate will. Hades appeared at the garden's entrance. She hadn't heard him approach, but somehow she knew he would come. He looked at her, at the crown, at the empty pomegranate rind, at her face that now held depths it hadn't held before, and his expression shifted through a dozen emotions too quickly to name. Finally, he simply knelt, not in submission, but in recognition, in honor of what she'd done, what she'd become. "You chose," he said quietly. "I chose," Persephone agreed. "I chose myself, both selves, all of myself. You understand what this means. You're bound here now. The living world can't fully claim you anymore. But I can't fully belong here either, can I? Not completely. I ate 6 seeds, not 12. I'm split, half light, half shadow, between." "Between," Hades repeated, and in his voice was something like wonder. "Neither wholly of life nor death, but the space where they meet." "The threshold," Persephone said. "I am the threshold." Above them, in the world of light and air, something shifted. The earth trembled, not in destruction, but in recognition. Far away, still searching, still grieving, Demeter felt a warmth stir faintly in her chest. Not return, not yet, but communication. A sense that her daughter lived and had chosen, and the choice was complicated but real. The balance of the world had tilted, and in that tilt, something new was being born. Winter would end, spring would come, but never again would the cycle be simple, unthinking, automatic. From now on, every spring would be a return, every autumn a descent, every winter a waiting, and every summer a fullness that knew itself temporary, precious because finite. Persephone had eaten 6 seeds of the pomegranate, and in doing so, she had invented the seasons.
The silence between mortals and gods had become unbearable. Altars stood cold, their stones blackened by fires that no longer burned. The smoke of offering had dwindled to nothing. There was no grain to burn, no fruit to consecrate, no wine to pour. Even Olympus had grown restless, its golden halls echoing with uneasy whispers rather than laughter. The gods felt it, the thinning of worship, the weakening of the bond between divine and mortal. They fed on prayer as surely as mortals fed on grain, and the prayers had grown desperate, then angry, then ceased altogether. What use in praying to gods who let the world starve? At last, Demeter climbed back into the heights of cloud and marble. She did not announce herself. She simply appeared in the great hall where Zeus held court, her form manifesting like frost forming on glass, inevitable, uninvited, undeniable. She had changed. The goddess who had left Olympus months before, warm, maternal, abundant, was gone. In her place stood something harder, a figure wrapped in gray, her hair unbound and streaked with silver, her eyes holding the empty cold of a field under snow. The scent of dried grain followed her like a shadow, the ghost of harvests that would never come. The assembled gods fell silent. Hera straightened on her throne. Poseidon's hand stilled on his trident. Apollo's lyre went quiet mid-note. Even Aphrodite, usually immune to others' suffering, looked uncomfortable. Zeus sat on his throne, ringed with the faint crackle of suppressed lightning. He looked weary, not physically, for gods do not tire, but existentially. The weight of maintaining cosmic order against the tide of one mother's grief had worn even his certainty thin. "Sister," he said, his voice the low rumble of distant thunder, "you return to us at last." "Brother," Demeter's voice was flat as winter wind across frozen lakes, "you have watched while the fields die. You have permitted the world to unmake itself. Do you enjoy ruling over corpses?" "The world follows its laws, Demeter. Law must hold, even when it wounds, even when it... Your law feeds on death." She stepped forward, and frost spread across the marble floor with each footfall. "If I withhold my gifts, all will perish. Every mortal, every animal, every living thing that depends on the cycle of growth. And when they are gone, when the world is empty and silent, what will you rule? What prayers will rise to your empty throne?" Zeus leaned forward, lightning flickering in his eyes, a warning. "You threaten Olympus itself?" "I threaten nothing. I simply state fact." Demeter's gaze swept across the assembled gods. "You cannot eat lightning. You cannot drink glory. The gods exist because mortals exist to worship them. Remove the mortals, and we become nothing but power echoing in void." Hera spoke, her voice surprisingly gentle. "She is not wrong, husband. The bond is weakening. I feel it. The prayers growing thin, the offerings ceased. We are becoming less." Poseidon nodded grimly. "The seas reflect what happens on land. Fish die in waters gone too cold. Sailors pray to empty air. Even I grow faint." Athena, ever strategic, leaned forward. "Perhaps the time has come to seek solution rather than maintain position. Cosmic law is important, but cosmic law that destroys cosmos defeats its own purpose." Zeus's jaw tightened. He was king because he maintained order, because he held the balance between chaos and stagnation. But what good was order in a dying world? "What is it you demand?" he asked finally, the words heavy with concession. "Return." Demeter's voice cracked for the first time, grief breaking through the cold facade. "My daughter, whole and living, restore what was taken." Zeus turned his eyes away, and in that gesture Demeter saw the truth. "You knew," she whispered. "This was sanctioned. You permitted Hades to..." "Balance demanded disruption. Your realm of growth, perfect and eternal, had become stagnant. The world needs both creation and destruction, both life and death in equal measure. Persephone's descent was meant to teach." "Teach!" The word came out as a snarl. Demeter's composure shattered under hammer blow. "You would use my daughter as lesson, trade her life for your abstract principle of balance?" The temperature in the hall plummeted. Snow began to fall from nowhere, drifting down through marble columns that had never known weather. "Then unmake your world," Demeter said, her voice gone soft and infinitely dangerous.
Let the heavens blaze white and the rivers burn like coals, if that is what justice requires. Or return my daughter and let life continue. Choose, brother, but choose quickly, before there is nothing left to rule." The marble floor cracked beneath her feet. The very foundations of Olympus groaned. Around her, the air grew thick with the scent of decay, of endings, of the absolute refusal of life itself. Zeus understood then that he had miscalculated. He had thought Demeter would grieve and eventually accept. He had not comprehended that a mother's love, when denied its object, becomes a force as implacable as gravity, as destructive as entropy itself. She would end the world, not in rage, but in sorrow, and no power he possessed could stop her. He raised his hand, and the lightning stilled. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of surrender disguised as command. "Hermes." The messenger god materialized instantly, his winged sandals barely touching the floor. "Go below," Zeus said. "Find what truth lives in shadow. Speak with Hades and with the maiden. Learn what binds her there, and if that binding can be loosened. Return with answers, and, if possible, with the girl herself." Hermes bowed, shot one glance at Demeter's frozen expression, and vanished. The hall remained silent. Demeter did not move, did not soften. She simply stood, waiting, a statue of grief carved from winter itself. "If he returns without her," she said quietly, "I will finish what I have started. This world will sleep forever, and the gods will sleep with it." No one doubted her. For the first time since the cosmos was born, Zeus feared not the titans, not the giants, not any external enemy, but the simple absolute power of a mother's refusal to accept loss. And in that fear, the world held its breath.
Hermes did not fall. He folded through spaces unseen, like light bending through water. His wings beat once, twice, and the barriers between realms parted for him as they did for no other god. He was the messenger, the psychopomp, the only one who could cross freely between life and death without being claimed by either. The descent was disorienting even for him. The air grew thick, close, taking on weight and texture. Colors drained away, replaced by shades of silver and gray. Sound changed too, became muted, distant, as if traveling through deep water. He emerged in the throne room of Hades, where rivers of darkness flowed at the edges and columns rose like frozen trees into shadow. But the underworld had changed since his last visit. The usual oppressive silence had lifted, replaced by something softer, not warmth exactly, but gentleness. The rivers flowed more quietly, the shadows seemed less absolute, and everywhere shades drifted with more peace than he remembered, their eternal wandering marked by acceptance rather than despair. At the center of the hall, standing beside the black throne, stood Persephone. Hermes stopped short, momentarily speechless. She was not the girl who had been taken. That maiden, bright, uncertain, half-formed, was gone. In her place stood someone complete, someone who had been broken and remade, someone who wore her duality like a crown. And indeed, she wore a crown, woven of asphodel and silver. It caught what little light existed and transformed it into something neither bright nor dark, but luminously between. She watched his approach with calm eyes, eyes that had seen death and understood it, that had made peace with endings. "Hermes," she said, and even her voice had changed. It carried depth now, layers, the resonance of stone and water.
You come as messenger." He bowed, not as deity to deity, but as living breath before what had become eternal. "Queen of the Underworld," he said, testing the title. It fit her like she'd been born to it. "Your mother has willed the world to sleep until you return. The seeds will not wake, nor the rivers run warm, nor any living thing grow unless you rise again to the surface." Persephone's expression flickered, sorrow, guilt, longing passing across her face like wind across water. "My mother suffers. The world suffers. Mortals starve. Animals die. Even the gods grow faint without worship." He paused. "She will not yield until you return." "If I return," Persephone said slowly, "will the dead be abandoned? I have learned their names, Hermes. I have felt their peace. I have helped them find acceptance. Am I to unlearn all that? Pretend this realm doesn't matter?" "No realm remains untouched by loss, lady, but to stay here while the surface world dies, that is a different kind of abandonment." Before Persephone could respond, Hades emerged from the shadows. He moved to stand beside her, not possessively, but as equal, as partner. His hand rested lightly on the back of the throne, not touching her, but near enough to offer silent support. "The choice is hers," Hades said quietly. "It has always been hers. If she wishes to return, I will not prevent it. I will help her find the way, even if it means losing her forever." Persephone turned to look at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, sorrow, understanding that love without freedom is merely imprisonment by another name. She closed her eyes, and for a moment the entire underworld held its breath. "The living world still remembers me?" she asked. "It dreams of you," Hermes replied, "and dreams are half a kind of truth." She opened her eyes, decision crystallizing in their depths. "Then I will return, not because I must, but because I choose to, because both worlds deserve tending, and I am the only one who can bridge them." She held out her hand, and Hermes saw what rested in her palm, a single pomegranate seed, dark as blood, gleaming with inner light. "But I cannot return entirely. I have eaten of the underworld. I am bound here as surely as I am bound to life. Guide me upward, Hermes. Let us see what the law makes of a choice like mine." Hermes inclined his head and turned toward the passage that led back to light, to air, to the surface world that had been slowly dying in her absence. Behind them, Hades stood motionless, watching them go. His face showed nothing, but the rivers of the underworld ran suddenly swifter, as if the realm itself wept at her departure. Yet beneath the sorrow lay something else, pride. She had chosen freely, and choice, Hades knew, was the only gift worth giving.
The ascent. The journey upward was neither joy nor pain, merely a gradual brightening of sense, the gray seeping toward color like ink diffusing through water. Persephone felt the change in her body, her heartbeat quickening, her lungs remembering how to hunger for air, her skin prickling with the promise of temperature. Weight returned to her limbs, substance. But something else remained, the anchor she'd forged by eating the pomegranate seeds. Even as she rose, she felt the pull downward. Not chains, not imprisonment, but connection, like roots that feed even as they bind. She carried the underworld within her now, its patience, its stillness, its deep understanding that endings are merely transformations. That knowledge wouldn't fade in sunlight. It would remain, coloring everything she touched. The passage brightened. Gray gave way to shadow, shadow to dusk. dusk to the tentative glow of dawn. The air grew warmer, thinner, alive with scent, earth and grass and the ghost of flowers waiting to bloom. Then suddenly they broke through. Persephone stumbled onto solid ground, gasping. The sunlight struck her like a blow, so bright, so aggressive after months of gentle gray. She raised her hand to shield her eyes, overwhelmed by color and movement and the sheer loud presence of living things. Birdsong, wind through grass, the smell of thawing earth. She had forgotten that life was this vivid, this insistent, this beautifully, terribly loud. Persephone. The voice broke through her sensory overwhelm like an arrow through cloud. She lowered her hand and saw her mother. The reunion. Demeter stood at the edge of the meadow, the same meadow where Persephone had been taken. She looked ancient and young at once, worn by grief but illuminated by hope so fierce it hurt to witness. For a heartbeat, neither moved. They simply stared at each other across the distance, unable to believe, afraid that believing would shatter the moment. Then Demeter ran, not as goddess, but as mother, stumbling, desperate, human in her need. She caught Persephone into her arms and held her as if she could press her daughter back into her body, unmake the separation, return to the moment before loss. "You're here," Demeter gasped. "You're real. She pulled back just enough to look at Persephone's face, her hands framing her daughter's cheeks. Her eyes searched frantically, checking for wounds, for signs of harm, for any evidence of what she'd endured. "Did he hurt you? Did he—" "No, mother." Persephone's voice was gentle but firm. "I was not harmed. I was changed, but not broken." Demeter pulled her close again, and this time she felt wetness against her neck, her mother's tears, hot and human and infinite. They stood that way until time itself remembered to flow again. Above them, light broke clean through the frozen clouds. The first warmth of returning spring touched the hilltops. Snow began to loosen its grip on the soil, melting into streams that ran bright and cold toward the valleys. The earth, sensing their reunion, began to quicken. Deep beneath the frozen ground, seeds stirred. Roots remembered their purpose. The pulse that had been silenced for months flickered back to life, tentative at first, then stronger. But before the greening could truly begin, Zeus's voice came like distant thunder. "It cannot remain so." The negotiation. The air shimmered, and Zeus appeared, not in full divine glory, but subdued, almost humble. Behind him materialized the other Olympians, Hera, Athena, Poseidon, Apollo, even Aphrodite, her usual frivolity replaced by solemn attention. They formed a half-circle around the mother and daughter, bearing witness to what came next. "She has returned," Zeus said. "This is good. But the law—" "Damn your law," Demeter said, not releasing her hold on Persephone. "The law is not mine, sister. It predates even us." Zeus's voice carried genuine regret. "What is consumed of the underworld binds it to it. This is fundamental, as unchangeable as death itself." Demeter's arms tightened around her daughter. "She ate nothing. She would never—" "Mother," Persephone's quiet voice cut through the denial. "I ate." Silence fell like stone. Demeter pulled back, searching her daughter's face with dawning horror. "No, you couldn't have. You knew. I warned you." "I chose to eat," Persephone's voice was steady. 6 seeds of a pomegranate. I chose freely, knowing what it meant." "Chose?" Demeter's voice broke. "How is that choice? You were taken, held in darkness, confused." "I was taken," Persephone agreed, "but I stayed of my own will. I learned, Mother. I discovered purpose in the depths. The dead need tending as much as any living thing. And she paused, searching for words. I found parts of myself I never knew existed, parts that could only wake in darkness. Demeter staggered back as if struck. Her face cycled through emotions too quickly to name: betrayal, incomprehension, grief compounded by new grief. You chose to leave me. I chose myself, Persephone said gently. Both selves, the one who loves light and the one who has learned to value shadow. Can you understand that? Before Demeter could respond, Athena stepped forward. The law is clear. 6 seeds consumed means binding to the underworld. The question is, what does that binding entail? She must return below, Zeus said heavily. It is the only. No, Hades' voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The Lord of the Underworld did not manifest physically, but his presence filled the air. Zeus frowned. Brother? 6 seeds, Hades continued, his voice thoughtful. Not 12, not the whole fruit. Half. She consumed half, which suggests division. What if the binding is not absolute, but proportional? What if she belongs to both realms, neither wholly, but both truly? That is unprecedented, Zeus said. So is everything about this situation, Hera interjected. A living maiden who becomes queen of the dead, a mother's grief that unmakes creation. Perhaps precedent is precisely what we need to abandon. Athena nodded slowly. A division, time split between realms, half the year above, half below. It has a certain symmetry. Symmetry? Demeter's voice was anguished. You would split my daughter like property to be divided? No, Mother. Persephone took her mother's hands. Not split like property, shared like breath, divided like day and night, each necessary, each sacred, each making the other possible. She turned to address all the assembled gods. I will go below willingly for half the year. I will tend the dead, maintain the underworld, help souls find peace. And for the other half, I will return to help you, Mother. We will green the world together, but differently now, with understanding that growth requires rest, that life requires death, that nothing blooms without first being buried. 6 months apart, how can I bear it? Because the alternative is worse, Persephone said. If I stay above entirely, the underworld suffers. If I stay below, the surface world dies. But if I move between them, both can thrive. I become the bridge, the threshold, the proof that boundaries are not walls, but doorways. Zeus considered this. The other gods waited, watching. Finally, he nodded. Let it be so. 6 months below, 6 months above. The cycle shall endure, eternal and unbreakable. Demeter looked at her daughter, really looked at her for the first time since her return. She saw the crown of asphodel and silver, saw the depth in eyes that had witnessed what no living thing should witness, saw that her child was no child, but something new, a being of duality, of transition, of the space between. You're not coming back, Demeter said softly. Not really, not as you were. No, Persephone agreed, but I'm not gone either. I'm becoming, always becoming, between the two. Demeter's face crumpled. Then, slowly, she straightened, wiped her eyes, drew herself up with the dignity of one who has learned that love must sometimes mean letting go. Then each return will be precious, each reunion sacred, and each departure, her voice caught, each departure will teach me again what it means to trust, to release, to wait with faith rather than fear. They embraced again, and this time there was acceptance in it along with sorrow. The earth beneath them trembled, not with breaking, but with understanding.
The first green shoots began to push through the thawing soil, hesitant but determined. "When will you go?" Demeter asked quietly. "Not yet," Persephone smiled. "Spring is ours first. Let me help you wake the world. Let me remember sunlight, growth, the joy of green things. Then, when summer turns to autumn, when the work of growth is done and the work of rest begins, then I will descend again." "And you'll come back?" Demeter couldn't help asking, like a child seeking reassurance. "Always," Persephone promised. "As surely as spring follows winter, as certainly as seeds rise after being buried, I will always return." "But you will also always leave." "Yes," Persephone said, "that is the bargain, the balance, the price of wholeness." Around them, the world held its breath. Then, released by their acceptance, it exhaled. Color flooded back across the landscape. Warmth spread from the south. Birds that had fled returned to empty branches. Rivers broke free from ice, singing their relief to the sky. Winter began to retreat. But it would return. It would always return. Because now the world had learned there is no spring without winter, no life without death, no joy without the ache of absence. The cycle was born, and in its turning, the world learned to breathe.
The first light of true morning found them standing in the meadow where the world had once broken. The scar of the earth remained, a faint crease through the grass, healed but never forgotten. Like all wounds, it had become part of the landscape's story. Frost still edged the stones, but beneath it, green began to tremble. Unsure at first, then determined. The earth remembered how to bloom, but it remembered now that blooming came at cost, the cost of waiting, of patience, of faith through darkness. Persephone knelt, pressing her fingertips into the soil. It was still cool, as though remembering death, but pliant, ready to yield again. She whispered something too soft for any but the earth itself to hear, and beneath her hands the first shoots pushed through. Pale, fragile things, but beautiful in their courage. Demeter watched her daughter silently. There was joy, yes, the relief of return, the gratitude of answered prayers, but threaded through it ran something deeper and more complex, recognition of distance, recognition that the girl who had left was not the woman who returned. Persephone's movements had changed. She touched the earth differently now, with reverence, yes, but also with knowledge of what lay beneath. Her gaze carried new shadow, a soft gleam that did not vanish even in sunlight. She was no longer only the bloom, she was also the root, also the dark soil from which green things rose. "You have grown," Demeter said quietly, "beyond me." Persephone looked up, meeting her mother's eyes. Her smile was tender. "Roots don't leave the soil when they deepen, Mother. They anchor everything that rises. I haven't left you. I've just expanded, become more than you taught me to be, but still built on that teaching. I wanted to keep you safe, to keep you in the light. And you did. You gave me everything I needed to survive when darkness came. Your teaching saved me, Mother. It gave me the tools to understand life so deeply that I could make sense of death." Persephone rose, brushing soil from her hands. "But I needed both, the teaching and the testing, the light and the shadow." Demeter's hand trembled as she touched her child's face. The cheek was familiar, the same bone structure, the same soft skin she'd known since Persephone's first breath. But the eyes looking back at her held eons she couldn't fathom.
Then perhaps every mother must learn to share the earth, to understand that raising a child means preparing them to leave, even when leaving breaks your heart. Especially then, Persephone agreed. They stood together for a long while, the awakening wind sweeping around them, stirring the long grass. In that breath, forgiveness did not need to be spoken. It was already woven into the air. Grief and joy tangled together like roots, inseparable, feeding the same soil. Above them, the sun climbed higher. Around them, the world began, tentatively, hopefully, to remember green.
Across the fields, the change spread. Snowmelt ran bright in furrows that had lain dead for months, cutting clean channels through earth that had forgotten how to give. Seeds that had lain silent, cradled in cold and waiting, began to murmur again. The first shoots pushed upward, pale, hesitant things, but hopeful. It started in the places closest to Demeter and Persephone, the meadow where they stood, the fields they'd walked together. Green spread from their footsteps like ripples from stones dropped in still water. Grass remembered itself. Flowers opened eyes that had been sealed shut since autumn. Animals felt it too. Deer stepped lightly through thawing woods, their winter-sharp ribs still showing, but their eyes bright with the promise of new growth. Birds returned in waves, confused at first by trees still mostly bare, but singing anyway, singing from instinct, from hope, from the cellular understanding that winter had finally loosened its grip. Bears woke in their dens, groggy and hungry. Rabbits emerged from burrows to find the first tender shoots. Bees, dormant in their hives, began to stir with purposeless buzzing that would soon remember its purpose. Humans, too, lifted their faces to the gentler sun and wept without knowing why. They had survived, barely. Their stores were nearly depleted, their animals gaunt, their children hungry-eyed and quiet. They had begun to believe that winter was forever, that the goddess had abandoned them to slow starvation. Now, seeing the first green, they fell to their knees. Some prayed, some simply sat in stunned gratitude. Some gathered their families and held each other, crying with relief so profound it hurt more than grief. In villages across the world, people gathered twigs with trembling hands. They planted again, not because they were certain of harvest, but because hope demands action. They built fires that smelled of promise instead of fear. They whispered stories to their children. The goddess has returned. Life has returned. We will survive. Demeter walked among them unseen, as she often did. With each slow step, her warmth seeped into the ground. Green rose in her wake, subtle, careful, knowing it must not race ahead of time. The earth had learned patience in winter's grip. Now it practiced that patience in spring's return. It was not abundance yet, not the thoughtless plenty of the time before the breaking. This was tentative growth, aware of its own fragility. Beauty that knew itself mortal, precious because temporary. In the evenings, Persephone sat beside her mother on a hill overlooking the valley. She watched the glow spread across the horizon, gold and pink and soft purple, the colors of endings and beginnings merged, and felt it mirrored within her. Not just in heart, but in memory, an awareness that the warmth of this world was sacred because it was temporary, that summer would come, and autumn, and then winter again, and she would descend once more, answering the call of the other half of her existence. She knew where she must return eventually. She had seen what lies beneath, and she no longer wished to forget. Spring was beautiful not despite death, but because of it. Each bloom a small defiance, each green shoot a tiny resurrection, and in their returning, proof that endings were never final, only pauses in a longer conversation.
When mortals speak her name, they remember her as the maiden who rises, the spring goddess, the bloom bringer, the symbol of youth and renewal. But few recall that she returns willingly to the dark, that she is also queen, also keeper of endings, also the one who helps souls cross from confusion to acceptance. As days lengthened and the world grew warm again, Persephone walked the fields beside her mother, blessing each sprout. Her touch was different now. It carried both encouragement and warning. "Grow," her blessing said, "but know that growth is only half the story. Rest will come, darkness will come, and in that darkness, transformation." The seeds understood in ways the living could not. They grew with new awareness, their reaching toward light balanced by deep roots that remembered the fertile dark. When the grains stood tall enough to ripple in wind, Persephone paused at the field's edge. She turned to her mother, and in her eyes Demeter saw it, the pull, the call from below, patient but insistent. "Life will not hold still," Persephone said. "It moves as I must, between the heights and depths, between the visible and the hidden. I cannot stay." Demeter nodded, sorrow and respect mingling in her expression. "Then each return will teach me again how to let you go, and each departure will teach me to trust what I cannot see." They worked together through the spring and into summer. The world exploded with green, with flower, with the loud abundance of living things making up for lost time. But Persephone moved through it with one eye always turned inward, toward the quiet place where she would soon return. She taught mortals who would listen, the bloom is not the whole story. The seed in darkness is also sacred. Honor both, love both, do not fear the turning. Some understood, most didn't, not yet. Understanding would come slowly, through generations, through the repeated cycle of loss and return, grief and reunion. But Persephone planted the seeds of that understanding, metaphorical seeds in human hearts, growing slowly toward comprehension. She belonged to both worlds now, and in that belonging she had become something unprecedented, the bridge between life and death, growth and rest, the visible and the hidden. She looked toward the horizon where mountains stood dark against summer sky. Beneath those mountains, deep in the earth, another realm waited. And part of her, the part that had eaten pomegranate seeds, the part that had learned to love darkness, ached to return.
Summer. The world reached its fullness slowly, luxuriously, like someone stretching awake after long sleep. Fields turned gold under a relentless sun. Trees, heavy with fruit, bent their branches toward earth. Rivers ran low and warm, perfect for swimming, for washing, for the simple pleasure of water on skin. Demeter and Persephone worked side by side, but their relationship had shifted. Where once the mother taught and the daughter learned, now they collaborated, equals, each bringing different knowledge to the work. Demeter understood the surface, sun and soil, water and wind, the patient coaxing of growth from seed to harvest. Her power was direct, warm, life-giving in the most obvious sense. Persephone understood the hidden, what happened in darkness, how decomposition fed growth, why rest was as essential as activity. She could sense which plants needed to be cut back, which animals were ready to return to earth, which fields required lying fallow. Together, they created something richer than either could have managed alone. One evening, as they walked through a meadow gone soft with twilight, Persephone stopped to teach a young woman who had come seeking wisdom. The girl, barely more than child herself, had lost her mother the previous winter. She knelt in the grass, face streaked with tears. "How do I bear it?" she asked. "The absence." Persephone knelt beside her, taking her hands. "You don't bear it alone. You let it change you. Let it make you someone who understands that love and loss are not opposites, but partners. That what you've lost doesn't vanish. It transforms, becomes part of the soil from which you grow. But it hurts. Yes, it will always hurt. But hurt is not the same as broken. You can hold sorrow and still bloom. You can remember death and still choose life." Persephone's voice was gentle but firm. "I know this because I live it. Every day I hold both joy and grief together. It doesn't get easier, but it becomes bearable. More than bearable. It becomes the shape of love that's honest about cost." The girl wiped her eyes, searching Persephone's face. "You lost someone too?" "I lose someone twice a year," Persephone said softly. "My mother when I descend, my love when I rise. But I also find them twice a year. And in the finding, the separation is redeemed, not erased, redeemed, made meaningful." The girl nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in her tear-reddened eyes. After she left, Demeter came to stand beside her daughter. "You give them what I never could," she said. "Permission to grieve without shame, understanding that endings are not failures. You gave them life. I just helped them understand death. Both are necessary." Human rituals began to develop around them, not the simple harvest festivals of before, but something deeper. Initiates came to learn the mysteries, that death was transformation, that burial was not ending, that the unseen world mattered as much as the seen. Persephone taught them in symbols and silence, showing rather than telling, trusting them to understand what words could not carry. The mysteries spread slowly, carefully, reserved for those who had the courage to look at death without flinching.
Autumn's arrival. The shift came subtly at first, a cooling in the morning air, the angle of sunlight slanting differently through the trees, the first leaves deciding, not from death, but from completion, that it was time to let go. Persephone felt it in her bones before she saw it, the pull from below, stronger now, not command, not compulsion, but invitation. The underworld calling her home the way a mother calls a child in for supper, the way a bed calls to someone exhausted, the way home calls to a traveler who has been away too long. She grew quieter as summer waned, more contemplative. She would stand at the edge of fields, staring toward the horizon where mountains rose dark and patient, and Demeter would watch her with aching heart. One evening, after the harvest had been gathered and the granaries were full, Persephone found her mother sitting alone, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire and sorrow. "It's time," Persephone said softly. Demeter didn't turn. "I know. I've known for weeks. I can feel you pulling away, like the tide before it turns. I'm not leaving you, Mother. I'm just going home. To your other home." Demeter's voice was steady, but pain threaded through it. "I understand. I don't like it, but I understand." Persephone sat beside her, taking her mother's hand, their fingers intertwined, living warmth against living warmth, both knowing this contact would soon be memory. "Must you go?" Demeter asked, even though she knew the answer. "Can you not stay a little longer, another month, another—" "If I stay longer, the balance tips. The dead wait for me, Mother. They need tending, and the living world needs rest too, needs winter, needs the pause that makes spring meaningful." "I know," Demeter squeezed her daughter's hand. "I know all of this, but knowing doesn't make it easier." "No, it doesn't. Love that costs nothing isn't really love at all." They sat in silence as the sun descended, painting their faces in gold and shadow. Around them, the world held its breath, the pause between exhalation and inhalation, between activity and rest. "Will you—" Demeter hesitated. "Will you think of me, down there in the darkness?" "Every moment," Persephone said. "I'll carry you with me, your voice, your laughter, the way your hands look covered in soil. I'll carry summer into winter like a lamp in darkness, and when I return, I'll bring winter's wisdom back to spring. We'll never truly be separate, Mother, not anymore. We're woven together now, not by proximity, but by love that's learned to let go." Demeter turned finally to look at her daughter, really look, seeing not the child she'd raised, but the woman that child had become. Queen, bridge, bearer of mysteries, someone complete in her own right, not merely an extension of maternal will. "Then I will practice," Demeter said slowly, "what I've never had to practice before. I will learn to trust the dark places I cannot see, to believe you're cared for even when you're beyond my reach, to wait without despair and grieve without breaking. And I will practice coming back, remembering that ascending is as important as descending, that both worlds need me, both loves matter, that I'm not betraying either by honoring both." The sun touched the horizon, and the world exhaled.
The departure. They walked together to the meadow, the same meadow where everything had changed, where the narcissus had bloomed, where the earth had opened its mouth and swallowed spring. It was different now. The flowers grew thicker, more vibrant, as if the soil had been enriched by sorrow. The scar where the chasm had opened was barely visible, just a slight depression in the grass, a place where green grew slightly darker, slightly deeper. Persephone stood at that spot and closed her eyes. She placed her palms flat against the earth, feeling its patient presence. "I'm ready," she whispered. The ground responded immediately, not violently, not with the tearing chaos of that first taking, but gently, purposefully. The earth parted like water, revealing the passage down. No chariot this time, no horses, just a path, silver-lit, descending in smooth curves, welcoming rather than devouring. Persephone turned to her mother one last time. They embraced, long, tight, memorizing the shape and scent of each other. When they parted, both had tears on their cheeks. 6 months, Demeter said. "Come back in 6 months. I promise, as surely as spring follows winter. I love you. I love you, both of my homes, both of my lives." Then Persephone turned and began her descent. She walked without hesitation, without looking back, not from coldness, but from trust. Trust that the separation was temporary, trust that love could survive distance, trust that endings were also beginnings. The earth closed gently behind her, like a door shutting against the cold, like a mouth closing around a secret, like the world taking a breath and holding it.
Demeter stood alone in the meadow watching the place where her daughter had vanished. The first frost followed minutes later, appearing on the grass like the earth's tears, crystalline and beautiful and cold. The wind turned sharp. The last flowers bowed their heads, not in death, but in acknowledgement. Summer was ending, autumn was here, and winter would follow soon. But this time, Demeter did not collapse, did not rage, did not refuse. She simply closed her eyes, felt the grief move through her like wind through wheat, and whispered, "Come back to me when the wheel turns. Until then, rest well, my daughter. Tend your realm, do your work. I will tend mine." Then she turned and walked back toward her temple, toward the work of preparation. There were rituals to teach, mysteries to preserve, mortals to guide through the coming cold. The world would sleep, but this time it would sleep with understanding, with faith that rest was not ending, but preparation for return. Winter was coming, and for the first time, winter came with blessing woven through its cold.
The cold came differently this time. Where the first winter had been born from grief, sudden, absolute, devastating, this winter arrived with intention, with permission, with the understanding that rest was necessary, sacred even. Demeter did not fight it. She stood in her temple as the first snow began to fall and felt something she had never felt before: peace with absence. Not happiness. She missed her daughter with an ache that never fully dulled, but peace, acceptance that this separation served a larger purpose. She taught mortals to prepare, how to store grain properly, how to preserve fruit, how to keep seeds viable through the cold months, how to gather together in the dark evenings and tell stories, keep memories alive, maintain hope through the waiting. This is not punishment, she told them. This is the breath between songs, the silence that makes music meaningful. Your fields are resting, gathering strength for spring. Honor that rest. Don't fear it. The humans listened, and slowly they began to understand. They created new rituals, festivals of light in the deepest darkness, celebrations of the solstice when the days would begin to lengthen again, stories about the goddess who descended so that others might rest. Some even came to love winter, the stark beauty of bare branches against gray sky, the crystalline perfection of frost, the way snow muffled sound and created pockets of intimate quiet. They learned that each season had its own gifts, its own necessity. Demeter spent the winter months teaching, tending her mysteries, preparing for the spring that would come. She did not wither as she had before. Her power remained, but it was held in reserve, a seed waiting, not a plant dying. At night, alone in her chambers, she would speak aloud to her absent daughter. "Today I taught the young ones about seed storage. You would have liked them, eager, thoughtful, asking questions I hadn't considered. The snow is beautiful tonight. It covers everything in white, and I find myself thinking, this is what you see in the underworld, this pure, quiet whiteness. Perhaps it's not so different from here. I miss you. I will always miss you, but I'm learning that missing can coexist with joy, that absence doesn't have to mean despair." The wind carried her words away. Whether they reached Persephone in the depths below, she couldn't know, but speaking them helped, made the separation bearable. And beneath her words, beneath the snow and cold, beneath the sleeping earth, life persisted.
Seeds held their readiness, roots maintained their grip. Animals hibernated but did not die. The world rested but did not end. This was the lesson winter taught, that apparent death could be preparation, that endings were not always final, that the dark, quiet months were not absence of life, but a different expression of it. When the solstice came, the longest night, the turning point, Demeter lit candles in every window of her temple. She stood in their warm glow and whispered, "The wheel turns, the light returns, and in time so will you." The winter heard her and held her gently, like a mother holds a grieving child, until the promise could be fulfilled.
Hades was waiting at the gates of his realm. He stood where the passage from above opened into the silver-gray expanse of the underworld, his dark robes stirring in the soft wind that blew from nowhere and everywhere. His face, usually so composed, so carefully neutral, broke into something unexpected when he saw her descending. Relief, joy, homecoming. "You came back," he said, and his voice held wonder, as if he hadn't quite believed she would. "I promised I would," Persephone said, stepping off the path and onto the familiar stone floor. The silver mist swirled around her ankles in greeting. The rivers whispered her name. "Did you doubt me?" "Not you, but I doubted the world would let you go, doubted your mother would release you." He moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel the cool stillness he carried. "I thought perhaps the living would find a way to keep you." "They tried," Persephone admitted with a slight smile. "My mother especially. But we made a bargain, with each other, with the cosmos, and I honor my bargains." She looked around the familiar expanse, the throne room with its obsidian columns, the rivers flowing their eternal courses, the shades drifting peacefully in the distance. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different, because now she chose to be here, chose it freely, with full knowledge of what she left behind and what she returned to. "I missed this," she said softly. "I missed the quiet, the patience, the way time moves differently here, the work we do." Hades' expression softened. "The realm missed you. The dead are more restless without you. They remember your touch, your comfort. I've maintained order, but I cannot offer them what you do, peace that comes from understanding rather than merely acceptance." "Then let me return to them." Persephone moved toward the throne, her throne, the one that had materialized for her when she ate the pomegranate seeds. She sat, adjusting her crown of asphodel and silver, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. She was home. This strange, impossible place was as much her home as the sunlit fields above. Hades sat beside her, and for a moment they simply existed together in comfortable silence, two rulers of the same kingdom, two keepers of the same mysteries. "Tell me," he said finally, "what was it like being above again?" "It was overwhelming at first. So much color, so much noise. Life is very loud, you know, very insistent." She smiled, remembering. "But beautiful, too. My mother's joy at my return, the way spring exploded across the land, the gratitude of mortals who thought winter would last forever." "Do you regret coming back?" "No." She turned to look at him directly. I regret that I can't be in both places at once, that loving two homes means always missing one. But I don't regret the choice. This," she gestured to the realm around them, "matters as much as what's above. You matter as much." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability showing through the careful control. "You'll always leave me," he said quietly. "Twice a year, every year forever. I'll lose you again and again." "Yes, and you will find me again and again. That's the bargain." She reached out, took his hand, her warm skin against his cool palm. "We could have chosen permanence. I could have stayed above forever, or descended forever. But we chose this instead, cyclical loss and return. It's harder, but it's honest. It honors both worlds, both loves." "Will you always return to me?" The question was small, almost childlike in its need for reassurance. "As surely as spring returns to earth," Persephone promised, "as certainly as the wheel turns, I am yours, not entirely, but truly, for half of forever. Is that enough?" Hades smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his austere face. "It is everything." They sat together as the realm hummed around them, adjusting to its queen's return. The shades drew nearer, sensing her presence. Work awaited, souls to guide, judgments to witness, the eternal tending that death required. But for this moment there was only reunion, only the quiet joy of coming home. Above, in the world of light and air, the first snow was falling, winter deepening, the world turning inward, resting, waiting. Below, in the realm of shadow and stone, Persephone had returned, and the balance held.
Winter passed slowly, but no longer cruelly. The mortals had learned to prepare, to store, to tell stories through the dark months. They gathered around fires and spoke of spring with faith rather than desperation. Demeter tended her mysteries, taught her initiates, and counted the days, not with anguish as before, but with anticipation. Each sunset brought her closer to reunion. Each dawn was one day less of separation. The solstice came and went, the turning point, the promise that light would return. Still she waited. Patience she had never needed to learn before became her daily practice. In the underworld, Persephone performed her duties with grace. She guided the newly dead through their confusion. She witnessed judgments and ensured fairness. She walked among the asphodel fields, bringing what comfort could be brought to those who dwelt in gray contentment. She and Hades ruled together, not as master and consort, but as equals. He taught her the deeper mysteries of death, how souls recycled, how memory faded and reformed, how endings fed beginnings in ways even the gods barely comprehended. She taught him something he'd forgotten in his eons of isolation, that death deserved not just maintenance, but love, that even endings could be sacred. At night, though night and day had little meaning in the timeless depths, they would sit together and talk. Philosophy, memory, hope. He told her of the ages before gods, when only chaos reigned. She told him of sunlight on wheat, of her mother's laughter, of things that grew and bloomed and knew their own mortality. Their love was strange, part partnership, part fascination, part the deep recognition of two beings who completed each other, not despite their differences, but because of them. He was ending, she was beginning. He was stillness, she was change. Together they made a whole that neither could achieve alone. But as the days accumulated into weeks and months, Persephone felt the pull upward growing stronger. Not a compulsion, The pomegranate binding didn't work that way, but a call. The living world needed her. Spring waited. Her mother waited. "Soon," Hades said one evening, reading her expression. "Soon," she agreed. "The equinox approaches. The balance tips toward light again. I'll miss you." Simple words, but weighted with eternity. "And I'll miss you, but we'll find each other again when the leaves begin to fall, when the harvest is gathered and the world turns back toward rest." On the morning of the spring equinox, or what would have been morning above, Persephone stood at the boundary between realms. Hades stood with her, helping her prepare for the ascent. "Go with my blessing," he said. "Bring life back to the waiting world. Teach them what you've learned here, and when you're ready, I'll come back," she finished. "Always. That's the promise." She kissed him, not passionate but tender, a kiss that held both goodbye and until later. Then she turned toward the passage that led upward. The ascent was easier this time. She knew what awaited. Overwhelming color and light and noise, the shock of returning to life's intensity, but also her mother's embrace, the joy of greening fields, the satisfaction of work that fed the world. She broke through into sunlight. Demeter was waiting, as she would always wait, as she had learned to wait, with grief held gently alongside hope, with trust that absence was temporary. They embraced, and the world exploded with spring. Flowers burst from frozen ground, trees remembered their leaves, snow melted in rushing streams that sang of joy and return. Birds filled the air with sound, color bled back across the landscape like spilled wine soaking into cloth. The mortals emerged from their winter homes, blinking in the sudden brightness, and wept with gratitude. They planted their fields with seeds carefully saved. They sang songs of return and renewal. They celebrated the goddess who descended so that they might know spring was precious. And the cycle turned. Spring into summer, summer into autumn, autumn into winter again. And with each turn the pattern grew stronger, more established, more essential to the functioning of the world. Each spring Persephone rose. Each autumn she descended. Each winter the world rested. Each summer life reached its fullness. Neither joy nor sorrow lasted forever. Both were temporary, cyclical, necessary. This was the gift and the curse of Persephone's choice, that she would always be torn between worlds, always missing one home while dwelling in the other, always carrying grief alongside joy, absence alongside presence. But in that tearing, that division, that eternal movement between opposites, she had created something essential. She had taught the world how to breathe, how to rest and wake, die and live, end and begin. The wheel turned, and would turn forever.
The wheel turns unnoticed until it creaks again into shadow. Years pass, mortal years, divine years, the slow accumulation of centuries into eons. The pattern established by Persephone's choice becomes simply the way things are. Children grow up never knowing a time when seasons didn't turn. Farmers plant and harvest by the rhythm she created. Each autumn, as the days shorten and the air cools, Persephone stands at the meadow's edge, the same meadow where everything changed, now sacred ground. Her mother waits beside her, hands folded in surrender that has learned grace. Neither begs, neither clings. They have lived the pattern enough times to see that each part belongs. Rise, fall, emptiness, return. The ache never fully disappears. Each separation still hurts. Each reunion still brings tears. But the pain has become familiar, almost comfortable, like an old scar that twings in cold weather. Demeter steps forward. "Will it always ache?" she asks, though she knows the answer.
The question itself has become part of the ritual. Persephone smiles, faint but sure. Yes, but ache keeps the pulse alive. Without longing, there would be no bloom. Without grief, joy would have no meaning. They embrace as leaves begin their slow descent, red and gold and brown, falling like the year's own tears. Around them, the world prepares, animals gathering food, trees drawing their life inward, the earth itself taking a long, slow breath before the silence. Then, without tearing, without storm, Persephone steps into the fading light. The ground opens quietly this time, a door well used, hinges smooth with repetition. She descends without fear, carrying spring's memory folded against her heart like a pressed flower, like a promise, like a secret she'll whisper to the dead. Above, her mother closes her eyes, feeling the warmth slip just beyond reach, the sweet pain of love kept in motion. The first frost follows Persephone's footsteps across the hills, patient and familiar, not punishment now, but blessing, the world's exhale before the inhale, the rest that makes growth possible. So the year turns once more. Winter settles over the land like a gentle hand, like forgiveness, like the understanding that sometimes love means letting go. And deep beneath the frozen ground, in corridors of silver and stone, Persephone opens her eyes to welcome the dark. Home again, until spring calls her back, forever and forever and forever.
In the shadow of God's stories, mortals watched and learned what they could. Each season became a parable they taught their children: planting, waiting, harvest, hunger, hope. Though they could not stand against time or command the gods, they shaped rituals to follow the rhythm Persephone had created. Songs of return, fires for the solstice, feasts for what must die so life may continue. They told the tale of a mother and daughter to remember this. No joy lasts by holding it still. Warmth must fade, love must release, every fullness must empty so it can be filled again. Clinging prevents the cycle, clinging breaks the wheel. The wise understood. They saw winter not as punishment, but as promise, that even when the ground lies silent, something moves beneath it, preparing, that rest is not weakness, but necessity, that death feeds life in ways visible and invisible. Children asked, why must she go? Why can't Persephone stay in the light? And the elders would answer, so the world can learn to miss her, so we can remember what it is to wait, so joy, when it returns, tastes sweeter for having been absent. Through their waiting, mortals kept faith with both the mother's grief and the daughter's courage. They honored Demeter's sorrow by acknowledging that loss is real, that absence hurts, that missing someone is not weakness, but proof of love. And they honored Persephone's choice by trusting that the dark places had their own beauty, their own necessity, their own sacred work. In their kitchens and fields, they practiced that faith without words, storing grain carefully, lighting small fires against the cold, holding one another closer when darkness came early. They learned to celebrate both the blooming and the harvest, both the rising and the descent. They created mysteries around her story, secret rituals for those brave enough to look directly at death without flinching.
The Eleusinian mysteries they came to be called, teachings that death was not ending but transformation, that burial was necessary for growth, that what descends will rise again. Generation after generation they told the story, changed it slightly with each telling, added details, forgot others, but the core remained: a daughter taken, a mother grieving, a choice made, a balance struck. And in the telling they kept the wheel turning. Thus humanity, fragile and mortal, learned its oldest lesson: letting go is not the end of love. It is the act that keeps love alive, the release that makes return possible, the grief that sweetens joy. Winter comes, spring returns, the cycle endures, and that endurance is itself a kind of mercy.
And so the tale settles back into stillness. The world sleeps again, each heart a small hearth against the cold. Winter spreads her white breath over stone and seed alike. The rivers slow, the light thins to silver. But inside this quiet, something stirs, a memory of motion, a sound of water beneath ice. This is the unseen faith of existence, that every silence carries the seed of its own song. When the snow melts, it will not be the same world, and that is the mercy of it. Persephone will rise again, but never the same as before, and neither will we each time we emerge from our own winters, changed, tempered, luminous with what we have endured. So let the frost come, let the nights grow long. Peace lies not beyond the dark, but within it. What is taken will return, but changed. Listen, even now, beneath the frozen ground, the pulse continues. The world dreams of green, and that dream is already becoming. The wheel turns, Persephone descends, spring waits in the silent earth, and love endures in the turning forever.